Hey guys, tonight, we're going somewhere hot, loud, sacred, and deeply unfair. The kind of place where you wake up before dawn, not to sip tea and meditate, but to scrub the floor in silence so your master's cat doesn't track dust onto polished stone. That's right, you're in ancient Egypt. But not as a priest, not as a scribe, not even as a respected bricklayer. You, my friend, are a sektinfam, palace servant to the Pharaoh himself. Your job everything. Your hours eternal. Your dignity optional. Your sanity hanging by a linen thread. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before Ra does. And trust me, the sun god is a lazy overachiever compared to your supervisor. The moment your eyes open, you're already behind. There's a tap on the reed mat by your head. It's the head steward's assistant. He doesn't speak. He just nods at the dark hallway, which is worse somehow. You pull on your linen tunic, still damp from yesterday's laundry rotation, and step outside into the courtyard. It smells like last night's incense mixed with stale bread and Nile humidity. Someone is already sweeping. Someone else is crying softly while polishing a copper pot. Standard morning. Your first task, scrubbing the steps of the eastern veranda. Not because they're dirty gods, no, but because the Pharaoh might walk there. And when you serve the living God King, maybe, is enough to justify 3 hours of on-your-knees elbow grease before breakfast. You kneel, you scrub. You start to wonder whether this is what the Book of the Dead meant by trials. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian servants in elite households often began their shifts before sunrise, performing purification and cleaning rituals not just for hygiene but for religious harmony. Clean surfaces weren't just tidy, they were spiritually balanced. There's a scuttling sound. You glance up. It's not a rat. It's the palace cat. He walks past you very slowly, tail high, right across the spot you just finished. He makes eye contact. On purpose. You may not believe in curses, but if anyone ever deserved one, it's him. You keep scrubbing. One courtyard over, a cook shouts about bread ratios. Another servant is carrying 2 amphorae of goat's milk and weeping. You nod at her in solidarity. She pretends not to see. A fringe detail. The Pharaoh's personal breakfast likely included lotus-infused honey pomegranate juice and tiny pastries shaped like birds. Your breakfast will be whatever you can chew without sitting down. Eventually, someone brings you a cup of warm water. You drink it like it's wine. Then someone else hands you a reed broom. The veranda's clean, so naturally they've decided it's time to sweep the Hall of Statues. These are life-size granite figures, each of them glaring down at you, like you're the reason the Nile floods unevenly. You sweep under their toes. One statue has a crack across its hip. The head of maintenance says it's a divine smile. You don't argue. The sun is rising now. It's golden and majestic. You do not appreciate this, because with daylight comes visibility, and with visibility comes more supervisors. They walk like crocodiles, slowly with intent, always looking for prey. Your name is shouted. You flinch. Apparently one of the potted palms in the entry court is leaning inappropriately. You go to fix it. You stand there for several minutes trying to reposition the heavy clay vessel without toppling it entirely. Meanwhile, 2 scribes pass by chuckling. You wonder if your awkward dance with the palm will be recorded in a ledger somewhere. Servant 142 defeated by tree. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh's household staff were strictly hierarchical or more rotational. But what's not debated is the sheer volume of labor involved. From wardrobe prep to architectural upkeep, the elite households were like well-oiled machines that ran on human exhaustion. Someone rings a small bronze bell. That's the signal. The Pharaoh is awake. You stand at attention, back straight, chin down, eyes to the floor. Your reward: you get to clean the breakfast antechamber. After he finishes, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get a leftover crust or two if the cat doesn't get there first. The sky's turning bright now. The courtyard is filled with light and voices and shadows that move like gears. You've been awake for hours. Your arms ache. Your stomach protests. But the palace is only just beginning to breathe, and so by extension, must you. After all, you are a servant of the Pharaoh, and it's only just sunrise. You're still chewing that crust from the antechamber. If you can even call it chewing. It's more like letting a hardened piece of bread soften slowly against your teeth, while hoping no one notices you eating where food isn't technically allowed. Which is everywhere. The palace doesn't stop. It doesn't sleep, doesn't slow down, doesn't sigh in relief. And neither do you. Because this isn't a house. It's a machine. A giant limestone and linen contraption fueled by incense tradition and the daily suffering of people like you. You shuffle past two guards as they adjust their bronze chest plates. They don't even glance at you. Why would they? You're not a soldier. You're not a priest. You're not even a royal gardener, which, believe it or not, is somehow a more dignified job. You're just a bar servant, though. One thread in the golden tapestry. One more anonymous pair of hands to keep the illusion spinning. Your next task comes without warning. A steward waves you over with a curl of his finger. The storeroom, he grunts. That's it. No context, no smile. Just a grunt and a direction. You nod, bite down your sigh, and go. The storeroom is tucked behind a sunlit hall filled with painted columns. Each wall is crowded with hieroglyphs, detailing the victories of kings, the favor of gods, the sacredness of royal birth. There's no mention of you, or your backache, or your blistered feet, or the jar of honey you accidentally dropped yesterday. Mainstream historical fact. Pharaoh's estates were so vast and complex that many dozens, even hundreds of servants were assigned to specialized storerooms, linen oil perfumes, grain scrolls, jewels. The storerooms were often overseen by scribes who accounted for every drop of oil, every bead of turquoise. And you're here to assist, which usually means carry heavy things while being scolded. You're handed a ledger tablet and told to walk behind a scribe who smells like aged onions and superiority. He names each amphora aloud. You nod and pretend to write something on your wax board, though it's already full of old math practice. At one point, he stops abruptly. That jar was half full yesterday, he hisses. You blink. He turns on you like you personally drank the palace's olive oil reserves. Did you open this? He demands. You open your mouth to speak, but he waves a hand. Never mind. We'll be watching. Which means, of course, you'll be the one actually watching. You now have to monitor a sealed jar of olive oil for 3 hours in case someone else takes a sip. And if they do, you'll be blamed for that too. You lean against the wall. Not for rest, don't be ridiculous. You lean because your knees ache from squatting, lifting, and moving silently for hours. You dream about stools sometimes. Not thrones, just a stool. Fringe historical detail. Ancient Egyptian servants weren't just workers, they were also symbols. When Pharaoh displayed his power, it was often through the number of people serving him. Ceremonial events required dozens of attendants, simply to carry objects he wouldn't even touch. You, in essence, are a prop in a divine stage play. A door creaks open. Another servant rushes in, eyes wide. You're needed in the scribe's hall, she gasps. You groan, not aloud, just emotionally. Scribe's Hall. Why does that sound so deceptively peaceful? You follow her down a narrow corridor, past rows of papyrus scrolls and golden reed brushes. At a table sits a young scribe hunched over a piece of bark fiber, swearing quietly. His ink has dried. The breeze knocked his palette over, and the new scrolls haven't been oiled properly. You're handed a tray with crushed acacia pods and a ceramic bowl. Stir this, he says without looking, and don't breathe near the scrolls. You stir, carefully. The bowl's contents smell like vinegar and burnt sandalwood. You try not to inhale, or sweat, or exist too loudly. Do you know how to unwarp papyrus, he asks suddenly. You nod. You don't. Good. Fix these. He gestures to a stack of curled scrolls and vanishes into another room. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat and begin the ancient art of guessing how not to destroy a government document. Historians still argue whether lower servants were trained in tasks like papyrus prep, or if scribes just delegated sloppily. You'd argue the second. With conviction. Eventually a bell rings again. Lunch. Or at least, someone's hacked lunch. You aren't technically allowed to eat during this shift, unless invited by someone above your station. So naturally, you hide in the shade near the garden and chew on a date pit you've been saving since last week. You watch as kitchen servants rush to and fro with silver trays, pomegranate wine-baked figs, roasted duck. The smell is dizzying. You stare at a crumb on the stone tiles and genuinely consider whether it's edible. You decide it's not. Then again, maybe. Someone yells your name. You flinch and stand up too fast. Your knees pop like overripe grapes. You're being reassigned again. The overseer needs someone strong. You glance behind you just to make sure he's not talking to someone else. He isn't. You sigh, and off you go. Back into the belly of the beast. Back into the endless rotations of tasks you didn't sign up for, all in the name of divine duty and palace perfection. It's not even noon, and somehow you're already behind. The thing about alabaster is that it never looks clean enough. It could be gleaming like Ra's chariot itself, and someone would still find a speck, a scuff, or a non-existent smear you supposedly missed. You learn this as you're handed a reed brush, a rag soaked in vinegar, and a command to scrub the one Pharaoh's ceremonial floor tiles. Not the actual throne room floor, mind. You just the corridor leading to the corridor that leads to the Antarctic soldiers. Real and floor. It's all symbolic, which means it's all sacred, which means it all has to be perfect. Once you start scrubbing. The first tile is fine. The second tile has a faint footprint. Probably the cat's. Doesn't matter. Still your fault. The third tile is where you slip slightly. Just a bit of vinegar water on your foot. Nothing dramatic. But someone saw. Watch your balance, barks the junior overseer, whose official job seems to be appearing at the worst possible moment. You nod. You scrub harder. Mainstream historical fact. The palaces of New Kingdom pharaohs like those at Amarna or Thebes featured elaborate tiled corridors and relief-carved floors with symbolic scenes of lilies, rivers, and defeated enemies. These weren't just decoration, they were keys, cosmic order underfoot. And you're trying to polish that cosmic order with a rag and prayer. Your fingers ache, the rag is fraying, the vinegar's evaporating in the heat. Then someone calls your name. You look up hopeful. Don't step on the cleaned part, they shout. You freeze mid-crouch. Of course. The cardinal rule of ancient servanthood. Clean it, but never touch it again. Especially with your peasant feet. You back away like a crab, one tile at a time. When you stand up, your knees sound like a funeral rattle. You wobble slightly and pretend it's the breeze. You've been at it for over an hour. Then the command comes, start over. Why? Because the pharaoh's procession was just rerouted. He might walk this way after all. Cue the jokes. Maybe he'll walk here next week too, someone mutters. You snort. Then remember you're not supposed to snort. You stifle it into a cough. You start again. Fringe historical tidbit. There's evidence that palace servants used pounded date palm fibers and donkey hair brushes to clean floors, which sounds gentle, until you realize you're doing it while hunched fasting and under surveillance. Halfway through your second pass, a loud voice booms from around the corner. Clear the corridor. You freeze. A procession is coming. You leap out of the way, dropping your rag into the vinegared bucket. You press your back to the wall, head bowed, arms tucked. Then they pass. A group of priests in saffron linen carrying a small wooden shrine atop their shoulders. Behind them, a perfumed trail of acolytes. Behind them, someone who might be royalty. You don't look. You've learned better. You breathe as they disappear. One of the acolytes drops a small pouch. No one notices. You do. You stare at it. Do you pick it up? Hand it in, pretend you saw nothing. You choose the safest option, hand it to the nearest guard, and immediately say, "It's not mine." Repeatedly. He grunts. Tosses it to a steward. Doesn't thank you. Back to scrubbing. By the time the corridor gleams like melted sunstone, your knees have gone fully numb. You try to stand, and your left leg buckles. You pretend you were bowing. Classic move. A few guards walk by. One says, "Nice shine." It almost feels like praise. You smile for the first time in 2 hours. Then the junior overseer walks past and mutters, "Too streaky." Next time, try not breathing on it. Your smile fades. Historians still argue whether palace servants were low-born laborers or specialized state functionaries. In your case, you feel like a glorified ghost, present exhausted and somehow always in the way. You're given a fresh rag and told to assist the incense team. That means carrying a heavy terracotta censer down 5 flights of shallow steps. While it's still lit, the handle is hot. The smoke stings your eyes. The steps are slippery, but you make it, barely. At the bottom, a priest waves you into a chamber filled with painted walls and the low murmur of chanting. You place the censer on its pedestal and step back into the shadows. You're not allowed to speak, or cough, or faint, so you just stand, still, sweating, invisible. You blink once, twice, and realize you've been here a while. You shift your weight. Bad idea. The censer tilts slightly. You reach for it instinctively, then freeze. It doesn't fall. The priest looks at you. You lower your eyes. Another near disaster. The rest of the ceremony is a blur of incense haze, rhythmic intonations, and your own racing thoughts about sleep bread, and the fact that your shoes are now permanently damp. You're dismissed. You trudge back up the steps. It's still not noon, and you've already polished the path of the gods and nearly lost your eyebrows to holy fire. Maybe this is what they meant when they said service is sacred. Or maybe they just meant, you don't get to sit down. You would think just once that preparing food for a being who doesn't eat would be easy. But no. Today's assignment, prepare breakfast offerings for the gods. You are not cooking for people. You are preparing a spiritual breakfast for some divine statues, whose appetites are as fussy as royalty and twice as mysterious. It begins in the temple kitchens, a humid stone chamber thick with steam and prayer. You're handed a basket of ingredients that include barley flour, figs, a small bowl of honey, and a rather suspicious jug of date wine. There's also a lump of what might be goat cheese, though it smells like regret. A priestess waves a hand over the supplies and says something in Old Egyptian that roughly translates to, "Don't mess this up." You nod solemnly. Mainstream historical fact: daily temple rituals in Egypt involved preparing full meals for statues of the gods, complete with bread, meats, beer, and fruits. These weren't symbolic gestures, they were full-on service routines performed 3 times a day, with precise timing and ceremony. Afterward, the food was sometimes redistributed to priests, rarely to servants. Your job is to shape the offerings with reverence, which is hard when the dough is sticking to your fingers and the goat cheese is developing sentience. You're shown how to form little lotus-shaped barley cakes. They're supposed to symbolize purity. Yours look more like anxious snails. You place them on a bronze tray, carefully lined with palm fronds, and try not to think about how hungry you are. The honey smells divine. You dab your finger near the edge. Just a touch. Just a whiff. "Do not eat the sacred offerings," snaps a temple aide who appears like a vulture mid-landing. You jump and nearly knock over the entire tray. Crisis averted. You carry the offerings into the sanctum, where the air is cooler and full of whispers. The god's statue sits atop a carved pedestal draped in cloth of gold and precious stones. Its eyes, painted in crushed lapis and onyx, seem to follow you. Not approvingly. You kneel and present the tray. A priest chants. You stay frozen. A second priest waves incense. You blink once. A third priest nods, and you're allowed to place the tray beside the altar. This is the part where you're supposed to back away slowly. But your foot snags on your tunic hem. You wobble. The honeypot slides. Time slows. But the honeypot doesn't fall. It stops just shy of tipping. You correct it, bow low, and exit the chamber as fast as one can while appearing serene. Fringe detail. Some gods like Ptah or Amun were believed to literally inhale the spiritual essence of the food offered. The physical food was untouched, but the spirit of the meal was consumed. Your mistake would have deprived a deity of breakfast, which frankly feels like a dangerous omission. Back in the temple yard, you're sweating from nerves and smoke. The priestess raises an eyebrow but says nothing. "Clean the kitchen," she says. You sigh. The kitchen includes clay ovens, a grinding slab for grains, sticky bowls, and the world's angriest goat tethered to a post. You begin by scrubbing pots with sand. Then you sweep the hearth. Then, just for fun, you get to haul 2 amphorae of stale beer to a compost pit half a courtyard away. As you walk, you trip. You don't fall, but the beer sloshes out and onto your foot. The scent is instant fermented dates, warm sand, and despair. You keep walking. Historians still debate whether these temple kitchens were staffed by dedicated cooks or rotating servants like you. You suspect the answer is whoever was most available, most unlucky, and most scared of breaking the sacred wine jar. You're told to deliver a new loaf to the scribe hall. You're soaked, covered in flour, and smell like expired fruit. Perfect. As you shuffle into the scribe's wing, 2 young assistants glance up and immediately start whispering. One of them points. The other giggles. You place the loaf on a scroll table bow stiffly and exit with your head high. Out in the sun, you exhale. Your stomach growls. A bird screeches, and then you hear it. "Servant, stop!" You freeze. It's the Hajfi, chief baker. A small round man with flour permanently stuck in his eyebrows. He looks you over. "You delivered the wrong loaf," he says flatly. You blink. He holds up the replacement. "It's identical." "Probably." "Take this," he commands. "Bring it back," and apologize. You nod, clutch the loaf like it's a newborn, and set off on your second walk of shame for the hour. You think about how you haven't eaten. You think about how this loaf might have once been destined for a god, and yet, you Kobatichu, lowly and invisible, can't even lick your fingers without risking divine retribution. By the time you return to the scribe hall, the assistants are gone. Just scrolls dust, and one perfectly smug loaf waiting to be swapped. You make the switch. You don't speak. You don't breathe. You don't make eye contact with anyone or anything. And then you walk back into the corridor, into the sun, into the heart of a palace that never acknowledges you, never thanks you, never stops needing something. But at least the gods are fed, and you're still standing, sort of. You'd think by now, with all the cleaning, baking, kneeling, carrying, and narrowly avoiding divine wrath, someone would be grateful. They are not, because today, you're under the eye of a very particular beast. The palace overseer. He's not technically royalty, not a priest, not even that important in the scrolls. But he has power. And worse, he has a list. A real one. Written in black ink on a fresh sheet of papyrus that somehow always has your name on it, even when you're certain you weren't involved. Today's list includes sweeping the inner court, retrieving lost wax from the scribe wing, hauling 3 amphorae of rose oil to the queen's bath, and of course finding the missing sandal from the temple steps, which you are somehow responsible for, despite having never seen the sandal-worn sandals or even known sandals could go missing ceremonially. You start with the sweeping. The inner court is already clean, spotless, so pristine you can see your exhausted face in the polished tiles. Still, you sweep. Not because it's dirty, but because if you aren't sweeping, it looks like you're slacking. And nothing invites pain faster than the appearance of relaxation. Mainstream historical fact. Overseers in elite Egyptian households often came from educated or mid-tier social classes. They were literate, well-fed, and held real authority over dozens of servants. Many were trained scribes or bureaucrats, and some even maintained daily task logs, holding workers accountable with the kind of precision that makes you wish for locusts. The overseer walks by. His sandals whisper against the tiles. He glances at you, frowns slightly, just enough to suggest disappointment, and marks something on his list. You have no idea what it was. Maybe your posture, maybe your face. Maybe you didn't smile at the breeze with enough enthusiasm. You finish the sweep bow stiffly and head to the scribe wing. The wax tablets are nowhere to be found. A scribe waves vaguely toward a pile of scrolls and says, "Somewhere over there." You dig. You unroll. You peek under stacked linen. You find a dead wasp. You do not find wax. Eventually, you spot a tiny wooden case under a reed mat. Inside, 3 wax tablets slightly cracked, half melted and unmistakably wrong. Still, you carry them back. You are immediately told they're the wrong ones. They need yesterday's wax, not training wax soon. You nod, apologize, and go back to find yesterday's wax. Fringe historical tidbit. Egyptians used beeswax and soot mixtures for writing practice, reused constantly by student servants and low-ranking scribes. Some tablets were dated, others not, and distinguishing them could be tricky when everything looks like melted charcoal on wood. Eventually, you find the correct set, because it has a small doodle of a falcon with a crown etched in the corner. Apparently, that's how they label Thursday. You deliver the wax. No one says thank you. Now the rose oil. You're told to carry 3 amphorae, each the size of a toddler, to the queen's bathing chamber, one at a time, carefully. You cradle the first one in your arms like it's a sacred urn, because it is. You pass through 4 gates, a hallway of priestesses, and 2 increasingly annoyed guards, who don't bother moving as you inch past them sideways. The bath chamber smells like luxury. Fragrant, soft, lit with natural light. Silk drapes, golden basins, a purring harp somewhere in the background. You, of course, don't get to enter. You leave the amphora at the threshold bow and scurry off. You repeat this 2 more times. By the 3rd trip, you're sweating rose oil through your pores. Then comes the sandal. Ah, yes, the sandal. You return to the temple steps, bare, sun-warmed limestone, polished by centuries of devotion, and begin your humiliating scavenger hunt. You check behind columns, under mats, around a ceremonial altar where a goat is currently chewing something suspicious. Eventually, you find it, on the head of a young child pretending to be Pharaoh. You lock eyes. The child smiles. You do not want to smile back. You retrieve the sandal, gently hand it to a passing attendant, and begin to walk away. You're late for the linens, someone calls. Of course you are. Historians still argue whether lower servants rotated duties daily or stayed in specific roles. Either way, you're definitely doing more than one job. At this point, you might be doing 6. The linen court is a sun-soaked courtyard where palace sheets, garments, robes, and towels hang in perfect rows like sacred banners. You are handed a bundle of fresh fabric told to separate it by thread count and absolutely not to crease anything. This is a trap. Every fold you make is either too sharp, too soft, too loose, or too aligned with the previous fold. The overseer appears again, says nothing, marks his papyrus again. You suppress the urge to scream into the folds. At long last, as the sun begins its slow descent, you're told to rest. Which really means go away, but stay alert. Someone might need something at any moment, so you sit briefly on a stone step in the corner of the linen yard, breathing the scent of rose oil and laundry. And then you hear it, the overseer's voice drifting from across the courtyard. Who folded this robe? You consider pretending you've gone deaf, but alas, your hearing works too well. You stand. Again, the robe in question looks fine, immaculate even. You'd hang it on your own wall if they'd let you. But here in the palace, perfection is subjective and yours never quite qualifies. The overseer pinches a corner of the linen like it's a frog he doesn't want to touch. Uneven. He doesn't show you where, just says it. And writes another mark on his cursed papyrus. You murmur understood and bow. He walks away. The linen flutters in the breeze, unaware of its offense. You gather your bundle and slink back toward the servant quarters, hoping to disappear into some blessed shadow where no one remembers your name. But that's when a page runs by, waving a reed tablet. You, bathhouse now, of course. Because after hauling oil and scrubbing corridors, you definitely have the energy to help prepare the Pharaoh's private bath. The bathhouse is quiet, dim, and unnervingly humid. It smells like crushed lotus petals and the memory of incense. You're handed a copper basin, a cloth scented with frankincense, and a wooden bucket of lukewarm water. The Pharaoh hasn't arrived yet, but that doesn't mean you can slack. No, this is one in preparation time, also known as the panic and hope nothing goes wrong phase. Mainstream historical fact. High-ranking Egyptian elites, including pharaohs, indulged in elaborate bathing rituals involving perfumed oils, shaved attendants, and ritual chants. Baths weren't just about cleanliness. They were spiritual resets sometimes conducted before major decisions or ceremonies. Your task is to polish the floor and lay out 3 towels in exact formation, one folded twice, one once. One in a swirl pattern meant to resemble a coiled papyrus stem. Who invents these rules, you wonder? And more importantly, why are they enforced like cosmic law? A higher servant, a towel arranger, apparently hisses, "No creases on the swirl." You nod. You re-swirl. She still scowls. You re-swirl again. Satisfied, she vanishes into the steam like an angry genie. Then comes the oil display. You help set it out, alabaster jars, each labeled with symbols only the priests can fully read. You recognize some scents: myrrh, cinnamon, blue lotus. Others just smell expensive. A priest arrives, frowns at the lineup, and swaps 2 jars for reasons unknown. You nod as if enlightened. Then someone knocks over a tiny bronze comb. It clatters against the tile like a war drum. Everyone freezes. You pick it up instantly, hands trembling, and hand it back to the attendant like it's sacred. He sneers. Be careful. You resist the urge to shout, "It wasn't me." Fringe detail. Some pharaohs were known to bathe in milk and honey, believing it softened the skin and pleased the gods. Cleopatra allegedly bathed in donkey milk, but scholars debate whether this was royal PR or just bad budgeting. Suddenly, a chime rings from the hallway. That's the signal. The pharaoh is coming. You and the rest of the staff line the walls, eyes down, hands behind backs. not breathing too loudly. He enters. You glimpse the hem of a golden robe, the edge of a headdress, the outline of divinity. Then nothing. You are not to look directly. You are not to move. You hear the water being poured, the quiet splash, the soft murmur of attendants describing each step aloud so nothing is missed or mistaken. You do not move. Minutes pass. Or is it hours? Eventually the chime rings again. The Pharaoh leaves. You exhale. The moment he's gone, the real work begins, draining the bath, cleaning the tiles, replacing the oils, folding the towels back into their sacred spirals. Backwards this time. And sweeping out every trace of royal humidity like it never happened. Historians still argue whether bathing rituals were reserved strictly for kings or extended to high priests as well. What they don't argue about is the sheer number of humans required to witness, assist, and erase every drop of that process. By the time you're done, your tunic is damp, your fingers smell like cedarwood, and your knees feel like they've been cursed by Anubis himself. You are told you can eat now, but eat is generous. You're led to the servant's shade tent, a long strip of cloth stretched across wooden beams where the exhausted collapse in silence to chew crusts and swallow water like it's treasure. You find a corner. You sit. You don't even bother brushing off the dust. You chew. It tastes like the bread has seen better centuries. Someone beside you snores softly. Another murmurs in their sleep. A third just stares into the middle distance, clutching a half-eaten onion like it's a sacred relic. And you close your eyes for just a moment, just a blink. Up, equal. The call snaps you back into your aching body. You stagger up, blink the sweat out of your eyes, and follow the others. New task, assist the groundskeepers. Which sounds peaceful until you remember the grounds are a labyrinthine of gardens, pools, and decorative gravel paths that need constant raking. You're handed a wooden rake. You glance at the pebbles. They are already aligned. Realign them, says the groundskeeper. He prefers waves today. Of course he does. You begin, one line at a time, bent at the waist. Under the sun, waves, not spirals, not zigzags, my waist. And as your shadow stretches across the perfectly groomed gravel, you realize the palace doesn't care that you exist. But it would absolutely notice if you stopped. The rake becomes an extension of your arm, a dull, splintering, shoulder-aching extension that drags over the gravel like some sort of ancient punishment, designed by a god who just really, really hated geometry. Waves, the groundskeeper reminds you like it's a sacred mantra. You nod, though your muscles are screaming something less sacred. The sun hangs above like a watchful eye, not moving, not blinking, not helping. Sweat slides down your back in slow rivers. Your tunic sticks. Your sandals grind grit into the soles of your feet. You're not sure whether you're rearranging gravel or just being gravel. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian palace gardens were not just for aesthetics. They were spiritual spaces designed to mirror the order of the cosmos. Lotus pools, date palms, rows of myrrh trees, all arranged with exacting care, echoing the mythic gardens of the gods. So when the pharaoh wants his gravel wavy, it's not a request, it's a divine alignment. You're halfway through your third wave row when a goose wanders into the pattern. A real goose from the palace pond. And it waddles right across your perfect gravel line, honking at absolutely nothing. You freeze. The rake dangles in your hand like a weapon you're not allowed to use. The goose honks again and poops directly in the sacred gravel. You sigh and start again. Nearby, another servant leans against a date palm trying to look invisible. She whispers, "Last week it was spirals. The week before stars." You whisper back, "What's next?" She shrugs. "Zigzag thunderbolts, probably." You both chuckle softly, the kind of laughter that only comes from shared suffering and mutual sunburns. Then a priest walks by, and you both snap silent eyes to the ground. Fringe historical tidbit. Some gardens were designed to include miniature canals with fish birds and floating lotus flowers. Palace servants were expected to clean these by hand, yes, catch fish, unclog mud, and even bathe birds if they got too dusty, which is exactly what happens next. You are handed a small net, says the groundskeeper, pointing to a stone-lined pond. The fish are too shy. You blink. Encourage them. So now you're squatting beside a pool, gently coaxing koi-like creatures out from under lily pads with a net the size of a sandal. The fish dart. You sweat. One splashes. A droplet hits your face like a warning. A child runs past and yells, "Catch them faster." You briefly imagine what it would be like to be a fish instead. Probably not much better. But at least you wouldn't be yelled at by pre-teens in gold-threaded sandals. Eventually, a priest passes and decides the fish are active enough for now, which you interpret as permission to stop existing. But no, next comes lotus duty. Apparently, the Pharaoh wants 36 lotus blossoms placed around the guest courtyard. Before dusk, arranged like stars circling the moon. No pressure. You and 4 others kneel by the pond, plucking blossoms delicately, one hand beneath the water, the other keeping the petals from tearing. Historians still argue whether lotus placement had ritual significance or was simply a show of wealth and floral vanity. Either way, your knees don't care. By the time you're laying the final bloom on a ceramic plate, your spine has stiffened into a perfect, permanent S. You're given a nod from the priest. That's it. It feels like applause. You return to the gravel path. You try not to look at the goose. It's back. This time with 2 friends. They're grooming each other and eyeing your rake like it owes them money. Waves, the groundskeeper says again. You grip the rake like a lifeline. Then miraculously a bell rings. Not the emergency kind. The shift end kind. You're allowed to go. But go just means return to the servant quarters for the evening rotation. You're not finished. Your pas contraints paused. Like a string that's been slackened, not cut. You trudge through the western gate of the palace complex, past the vendor stalls where you're not allowed to shop, past the stables where the horses live better than you do, and into the narrow mud-brick alley that leads to the workers' court. There, a small group is gathered around a hearth. One girl is washing a tunic in a clay basin. One man is sharpening a reed knife. A boy sleeps under the shade of a broken canopy, a half-eaten fig in his hand. You sit. Someone passes you a crust. You chew slowly, thoughtfully, like it's a royal meal. Fringe tidbit again. Servants often lived on site at the palace in shared quarters known as workmen's villages or servant yards. They were given housing, meager rations, and clothing, but privacy, comfort, and upward mobility were rare. If a servant was ever promoted, it was usually due to extreme loyalty, not skill. You lean against the wall. You watch the sun begin to dip. The sandstone walls glow peach and rose in the dying light. Your limbs feel like molten rope. Someone sings a quiet tune. No one knows the words. Doesn't matter. You close your eyes for just a moment. A voice calls. Bath cleaning duty. You open one eye, then the other. You stand, because you always do. The bath cleaning chamber is not the glorious oasis you might imagine after the Pharaoh has gone. No rose petals, no divine fragrance lingering in the air, just used water. Slippery tiles, and the very distinct smell of wet limestone and disappointment. You're handed a stiff reed brush, a jar of gritty soap paste, and a rag that has seen too many lifetimes. Scrub from the outside in, says the senior washer, a stern woman with forearms like granite. Always counterclockwise. Clockwise invites bad spirits. You nod. You don't question the logic. Not after the day you've had. You kneel, again. You begin to scrub. Mainstream historical fact. Elite Egyptian baths were drained manually, often by buckets or rudimentary sluices. Attendants were expected to remove every trace of the bathwater, including soot from incense, traces of oils, and even footprints. Yes, literal footprints. Had to vanish as if no one had ever been there. You dig your brush into the corner grout, which looks suspiciously darker than it should. Maybe wine, maybe blood, maybe just dirt. You don't ask. You just scrub. Beside you, another servant mutters a prayer. Not to a god, but to their Anis Bikauntidi, begging them to hold out just one more shift. You'd laugh, but your throat's dry. Midway through cleaning, your brush snaps in half. You stare at it. You hold up the broken stick. Use your cloth, says the supervisor without glancing up. Of course. You switch to the rag fingers, brushing the slimy corners, knuckles scraping against sharp stone. It smells like ancient lavender and fresh exhaustion. You finish the first tile, then the next, then 36 more. Someone spills oil. You clean that too. Someone sneezes near the incense tray and knocks over a burner. You leap up, grab it mid-fall, and burn your palm. The senior washer nods. Good reflexes. You take that as high praise. Fringe historical tidbit. Ancient Egyptians sometimes used natron, a natural salt compound to clean and purify sacred spaces. Mixed with water and oils, it acted like a spiritual detergent and occasionally bleached tunics in unexpected polka dots. Your tunic now sports 3 new blotches. You tell yourself they're fashionable. Eventually, the pool is drained. The towels are folded. The tile glistens like moonstone. And still you remain wiping down a carved soap dish that's shaped like a falcon. Why is there a falcon-shaped soap dish? No one knows. But it's sacred, and you're responsible for every feathered inch. As you're wringing out your cloth, you hear it. Court attendants to the south stairs. That's you. You sigh. Wipe your hands on your already ruined tunic and shuffle out the chamber toward the south wing. Your calves scream. Your arms vibrate like you've been cranked by a wheel. You're barely through the archway when a steward blocks your path. You there? We need extra hands in the jewel room. Oh no, not the jewel room. Historians still debate whether royal jewelry in ancient Egypt was handled daily or only for ceremonial occasions. What they agree on, the handling, was never done casually. Every piece from scarab amulets to lapis signet rings was catalogued, guarded, and cleaned. By servants whose hands were expected to tremble. Just the right amount. You enter the jewel room and instantly regret it. The floor gleams. The air smells like cinnamon and authority. Every surface holds something terrifying: gold necklaces that could pay for a village bracelets shaped like coiled snake's earrings, so heavy. You wonder if ears back then were made of steel. You're handed a polishing cloth and pointed toward a chest. You bow. You open the chest. Inside, rows of golden beetles. No, not real beetles. Scarab amulets. Polished to a mirror sheen, inlaid with turquoise and etched with prayers older than your ancestors. You lift one. It's warm from the sun. You polish gently. A guard walks past. You stop breathing until he's gone. The polishing is meditative, almost peaceful. You lose track of time. Until you drop one. It bounces once, then rolls under a shelf. Your soul leaves your body. You get on your hands and knees, reaching blindly beneath the carved table, brushing past dust and a single dead moth. You find the scarab. Thank every deity you know. You lift it. It's unharmed. You place it back, and you never ever blink again. By the time the steward returns, the cloth is stained and your fingers are sore. He nods. You're done. For now. That for now hangs in the air like a threat and a promise. You bow, return the cloth, and leave with the slow shuffle of someone who's forgotten what soft surfaces feel like. The sun is lower now, casting golden slats through the pillars. A flute plays somewhere in the distance. You pause for just a second in the shadow of the colonnade. You exhale. Then the shout comes. Sand track cleanup, go. You trudge. Because that's what servants do. If there's one thing you've learned, it's that sand is everywhere. It doesn't matter how many times you sweep it, rake it, or carry it away in woven baskets, it always returns like some soft, gritty curse whispered by the desert itself. The sand track. Stretching behind the palace training grounds is where royal children practice chariot riding and foot races. And your job now, make it perfect. Flat, even, immaculate. You're handed a palm-woven rake with uneven teeth and a half-broken handle. Beside you, another servant nods solemnly and mutters, "Blessed be the blisters." You smile just a little. You drag the rake across the sand. The wind promptly undoes your work. You do it again! Mainstream historical fact. Royal grounds were regularly maintained, not just for beauty, but for symbolism. Smooth sand meant control over chaos. A concept that ran deep in Egyptian cosmology. A wrinkled training track could be seen as disorder, and disorder offended the gods, and more importantly, the pharaoh's mood. As you push forward, grains slip into your sandals, forming little collections of personal misery. You're sweating again, though at this point, you're not sure you ever stopped. Someone calls out, "Track must curve like the Nile." Of course it must. You adjust your rake path. A chariot wheel mark appears behind you. You stop, turn. Teenaged prince. Maybe 13 rides his chariot in lazy circles through the area you just raked. He doesn't look at you, doesn't even seem to notice you exist. You bite your lip. Rake again. Fringe detail. Some royal children were trained in military drills from the age of 5. Their practice areas often doubled as demonstration zones, places where nobles could watch and judge. So it's not just about the prince riding. It's about making him look good, Stuckelper. And you're the background artist. The prince halts. He points at a dip in the sand. That looks wrong. The steward beside him snaps, "Fix it." You run, smooth the dip, reflatten the curve. The prince nods like he's carved the world with his finger. You retreat again to the shadow edge of the colonnade. But not for long. You're summoned to Peter Contir Autumn. Pet duty next at the Retom Kantika Grindstern. Yes, pet duty. A palace cat has gone missing. She answers to Nefer Shadow, says the kitchen matron. Do not scare her, she bites. You think she means the cat. You hope she means the cat. You wander the garden hedges, whispering softly to bushes and flower pots like a madman. Nefer Shadow. Come here, girl. You find her atop a fig tree, glaring down at you with the pure judgment of Bastet herself. You stretch your arms. She hisses. You retreat. Eventually, a cook tosses you a sardine. You wave it like a bribe, kneeling beneath the tree. She pounces. Onto your head, then your shoulder, then the sardine, then vanishes back into the palace tail high, like you were the lost one all along. You trudge back, hair full of paw prints. She's back, someone says. No thanks. No smile. Just a nod. Historians still argue whether palace animals were true pets or symbols of divine presence. Cats especially were sacred, embodying protection, grace, and sometimes unpredictability, much like the pharaohs they roamed beside. Next, you're told to help prepare the Bertsteksitenu evening lantern swarm. This sounds easy, romantic even. It is not. You are handed a basket of oil-soaked wicks, delicate alabaster lantern shells, and a small pot of lighting paste made of animal fat and crushed herbs. Your job, place the lanterns at precise locations throughout the palace colonnades. Before the sun dips completely, each one aligned to reflect the moonlight as designed. Who designed this? No one says. You jog, you sweat, you light each lantern with a thin reed. One flares too high, you blow on it. One goes out, you relight it. One cracks. You hide the pieces behind a pillar. Fringe, tidbit, ancient Egyptian palaces sometimes hosted night feasts or rituals. Under moonlight, where carefully arranged lanterns weren't just decoration, they were part of the story. A line of flame to guide the gods. As the last lantern flickers to life, the moon crests the horizon, turning the courtyard silver. For one breathless moment, the palace looks still, sacred, even beautiful. You stand in the center, lit by oil and moonlight, and almost forget your hunger. Your aching feet, your blistered hands, almost. Then someone spills a water jug, and you're summoned to mop. Again, you bow, you go, because this is your life now. The mop is little more than a bundle of reeds tied to a crooked stick, but you wield it like a sacred staff, guiding puddles across polished tile toward a cracked drainage grate. The spilled water, of course, wasn't your fault, but you're the one cleaning it up. Because that's what Pharaoh's servants do. They exist to make mistakes disappear even when those mistakes aren't theirs. You bend, drag, twist, and wipe, over and over. Your back crackles with each twist. A small trail of water snakes under a pillar. You chase it. You always do. Mainstream historical fact. Many Egyptian palaces were designed with complex water systems, including basins, drains, and channels to manage both cleanliness and symbolic purity. But in practice, when something spilled, it was a servant's job to fix it, not the architecture's. As you finish wringing out the last of the water, someone claps once sharply. Storeroom duty. Oh, joy. You pass through 3 arched halls, descend a narrow staircase lit by wall-embedded oil lamps, and enter the storeroom, a cold, dusty place where amphorae line the walls like obedient soldiers. You're told to take inventory. No scroll, no assistant, just you, a bit of charcoal in the back of your hand. You start counting. 1, 2, 3, pause. That jar is leaking. You gently lift it. The base crumbles in your hands, sending sour-smelling beer across the stone floor. Fringe historical tidbit. Egyptians stored goods in sealed amphorae, labeled with high symbols or priestly abbreviations. And servants were expected to recognize contents by smell, weight, or even sound when shaken. You grab a rag and sop up the mess, nose wrinkling at the pungent brew. You cover the broken jar with a cloth and mark an X on the wall. No one tells you what to do in these cases. You just guess and hope it's right. You continue. You find 3 jars of dates, 4 with fish paste, and 1 labeled "Do Not Open." You do not open, hacked it. Smart move. As you finish counting, a mouse darts past your foot. You don't scream. You do, however, nearly drop a jar of cumin. Back upstairs, you pass the courtyard again, now glowing with the full palette of night. Lanterns flicker. The sky is velvet black and powdered with stars. You exhale, hoping that maybe now, finally, you're done. A soft bell rings. Dinner. No. An entertainment. Because even Pharaoh's nights aren't complete without music, dance, and the humble contributions of unseen hands like yours. You're directed to help with the Masterkommand. Instruments. You find yourself in the musician's preparation chamber, polishing a lyre, tuning a harp string, checking a flute for cracks. One of the musicians asks if you've ever played. You nod sheepish. Only the reed pipe. He grins. Then you'll carry the drums, of course. You hoist the sacred drum painted with images of Hathor and rimmed with gold leaf into your arms. It's heavy. It smells like sweat, incense, and centuries. You bring it to the pavilion. The pharaoh is seated in the distance, flanked by high priests, favored wives, and stone-faced guards. The musicians take their places. You set the drum gently at the lead percussionist's feet and back away without a sound. Historians still argue whether all pharaohs personally attended nightly performances or only during festivals, but either way, music was integral to royal life. It was both pleasure and power, and every note you help deliver feels like a test you're expected to pass in silence. The music begins. Its beautiful flutes and sistrums, harps, and claps a rhythm that pulses like a heartbeat through the warm night air. You listen from behind a column, knees drawn to your chest. A small child appears beside you. She wears a linen shift, a bit of charcoal on her nose. She whispers, "I want to dance when I grow up." You smile. "Then dance now." She does, softly like a breeze. Then a bell chimes. The musicians stop. Everyone freezes. The pharaoh stands, and everyone bows. Deeply. You do too. Your nose brushes the stone. Your heart pounds. Silence. Then the pharaoh turns and leaves. The spell breaks. People exhale. Servants begin moving again, clearing plates, folding cushions, extinguishing incense. You carry the drum back to the storage chamber, your arms shaking from the effort. You think maybe this is the end of the day. And it almost is, until you hear it. Nefershadow is missing again. Of course she is. You don't know if Nefershadow is the goddess of inconvenience, or just a very bored cat. But once again, you're the one crawling through the underbrush, whispering sweet nothings into every potted palm tree and herb planter in the south courtyard. The moon is high now. The palace stones have cooled, and the breeze off the Nile finally cuts through the heat of your skin. But you can't enjoy it, not while you're kneeling in the garden, swatting mosquitoes, calling out for a feline diva who may or may not even like you. Nefershadow, girl, come on, I have sardines again. A faint rustle in the papyrus reeds. You squint. Could be the wind. Could be a crocodile. Could be your mind unraveling from exhaustion. Then, meow, there she is, perched on top of a statue of Thoth, like she's personally contemplating the secrets of writing and mischief. Her tail flicks. Her eyes gleam. You approach slowly. She waits. You inch closer. She leaps. Not into your arms, but onto the palace wall, disappears behind a curtain, and leaves you blinking in the moonlight. Mainstream historical fact. Cats were so revered in ancient Egypt that harming one even accidentally could result in severe punishment. Pharaoh's pets in particular were treated like nobility. Some were even mummified and buried in decorated coffins. You decide to try the kitchen. Sure enough, Nefershadow is already there, curled on top of the bread oven like she owns it. A cook hands you a scrap of boiled fish with a smirk. She's training you. You nod defeated. She purrs. You return her to the chamber. Not your chamber. Of course, hers, with silk cushions and a shallow bowl of perfumed water. You tuck her in like a baby queen and bow as you leave. You pass a mirror on your way out. The reflection catches you off guard. You look ancient. Dust in your hair, smudges under your eyes, a sunburn peeling across your nose. You squint. Is that a grain of rice on your ear? Probably. You reach your quarters, a small shared cell with 4 mats, 2 jars of stale barley beer, and 1 flickering lantern. You collapse onto the mat. Your bones sigh. You think briefly about running away, just walking into the desert, becoming a mirage. But then someone shuffles in beside you, drops an armful of rushes and groans, back in 2 hours for incense duty. You nod. You both lie in silence. Fringe, tidbit servants were often on call day and night, summoned by bell shouts or even claps. Some wore bells around their ankles, so superiors could track their movements in the dark. You close your eyes. Try to sleep. A mosquito buzzes by your ear. You slap it. Miss. The lantern flickers, and just as you begin drifting, bong, a deep resonant gong. The ceremonial incense hour has begun. You stagger upright, limbs stiff as embalmed linen. You grab the jar of dried resin and a shallow bronze plate. You walk in slow, aching steps to the outer shrine, where priests are already chanting. The Pharaoh has retired to his private wing. But the gods do not sleep. You are told to grind the incense, frankincense, and myrrh into a fine powder. Your hands smell holy. Your wrists throb. Mainstream historical fact: ritual incense was burned at dawn, midday, dusk, and midnight to maintain cosmic order. A sacred responsibility not even the lowest servants dared neglect. As you swirl the powder into flame, a pillar of fragrant smoke rises, curling like a snake toward the open sky. It fills your lungs. You cough, silently. You kneel behind the altar. A priest recites the prayer of purification. You try not to doze. Your head dips once, then twice, then an elbow nudges you. You're up again, wide-eyed. Present. The incense ceremony concludes. The priest dismisses you with a glance. You walk back to your cell under a canopy of stars. Your sandals scrape against sandstone. The Nile whispers in the distance, water against bank like time brushing the edge of memory. You lie down. No pillow. Just mat. No dreams. Just darkness. Then, a whisper. Servants to the river gate. Your body groans louder than your mouth. You rise, because you're a pharaoh's servant, and this is your forever. The river gate smells like dawn before it even arrives. That strange mix of fish, wet reeds, sweat, and clay, sharp and earthy like the world hasn't washed its face yet. The air feels thicker down here, as if the Nile itself is exhaling slowly after a night of holding its breath. You join the silent line of servants winding down the slope, baskets in hand, your feet cold with dew from the grassless path. The stars above are fading, but the horizon is still just a deep, dark ink. Somewhere behind you, a rooster thinks it's time. It's not. You're here for the Puria morning water run, collecting fresh river water for the palace basin's offerings and, of course, the pharaoh's personal bath. You and 4 others kneel at the edge, clay jugs beside you. You fill each slowly, careful not to stir up silt. The trick is to let the jug sink sideways, mouth just below the surface, and then twist it vertical without gulping in river mud. You've done it enough to be good at it. Mainstream historical fact: water was collected several times a day for both ritual and domestic use. Elite households had their own purification routines, and water had to be carried filtered through linen and stored in cool underground jars to prevent spoilage. There were no pipes, only people. The jugs fill. You load them into a reed sled. The climb back up is harder. Always is. The weight pulls your arms straight down. You don't fight it anymore. You lean into the slope, let your sandals dig tiny trenches, and breathe in time with the drag. Keep them steady, says the overseer. Spilled water's a spilled blessing. You nod, teeth clenched. A servant behind you slips. Water crashes onto the stones. Everyone winces. Even the river seems to pause. No one speaks. Not yet. Then he'll redo the run. Alone. The rest of you move on. Fringe tidbit. Some high-status Egyptians believed that river water collected before sunrise held special power, particularly if used in rituals for healing or protection. That's why these water runs weren't just chores. They were ceremonies in motion. Back at the palace, you unload the jugs. A steward inspects each for clarity. You're told to carry 2 to the garden basin, 1 to the Kaptityum temple pool, and 1 to the pharaoh's kitchen. Yes, he has his own kitchen. With spices you've never tasted and ingredients you can't even pronounce. The kitchen smells like paradise. Roasted duck, honeyed bread, pickled lemons, and grilled lentils drift past your nose in a warm fog. But you're here to drop off water, not to linger. Set it near the figs, says a cook. You do. You leave. You regret nothing more than the fact that you can't even lick your fingers. As you pass the side garden, a new order reaches you like thunder. The scribe's chamber needs cleaning. Oh, right. Him. The royal scribe is a man who speaks only in full proverbs and wears a tunic so perfectly pleated it could slice dates. His chamber is a mess of scrolls, reed pens, ink stains, and something unidentifiable that smells like garlic and regret. You enter quietly. You sweep carefully. You dust each shelf, wipe every pot of ink, and realign the carved pen holders so that Thoth, god of writing, might spare you a smudgeless day. Mainstream historical fact: scribes were among the most respected officials in ancient Egypt. They were trained from childhood and often worked directly with the pharaoh recording taxes, rituals, and events. Their chambers were considered sacred extensions of state power. You knock over a scroll. You catch it mid-roll. You set it back in place, heart pounding. No one saw. You pray Thoth blinks. The scribe returns. Doesn't thank you. Doesn't look. He just sits, opens a scroll, and begins to mutter aloud. You're dismissed. Outside, the sun is fully risen now. The palace glows, pale gold heat shimmering at the edges. Birds circle the roofline. The first official chants of the morning echo through the east wing. You think maybe you can eat. Back in the servant court, a bowl of beans and barley mush is passed to you. Warm, bland, perfect. You sit in the shade of a low wall and eat slowly, methodically, like this is the best part of your day. Because honestly, it might be. Fringe detail meals for servants were typically simple bread, beans, lentils, and water. But during festivals or royal births, leftovers from elite feasts were sometimes passed down the ranks. Those days rare, glorious, legendary. Today is not one of those days. Still, the mush is warm, and no one's yelling. Yet, someone kicks your foot. Bath chamber, again. Of course. You rise, because Pharaoh's servants don't get seconds. They get summoned. The bath chamber is already humid when you arrive, thick with steam rising from heated basins, and fragrant with the faint trace of lotus oil and last night's incense. You're not here to bathe, not unless you count being coated in sweat while scrubbing tiles as some kind of mystical cleanse. Today's task: prepare the pharaoh's midday soak. Not take it, not assist with it. Prepare it. That means hauling ceramic urns of warm water, precisely warm, not hot, checking for loose tiles, smoothing linen towels so their folds face outward, don't ask why, and ensuring that the bath chamber smells like divine serenity instead of wet limestone and your armpits. Mainstream historical fact: the pharaoh's hygiene rituals were deeply tied to their divinity. Cleanliness was not just personal, it was political, symbolic. Ritual bathing was a purification rite before ceremonies, audiences, and offerings. The water had to be fresh, the oils sacred, and the servants invisible. You begin with the urns. Each one must be filled from the kitchen hearth, balanced on your shoulder, and poured into the ceremonial tub, an alabaster basin carved in the likeness of the sacred Nile crocodile. Though thankfully, it doesn't bite. It takes 5 trips. By the 3rd, your tunic is soaked and clinging to your back. By the 5th, your arms feel like papyrus reeds in a thunderstorm. You wipe your brow, but wait, the floral oils haven't been added yet. You're handed a small jar of a blue lotus essence. So rare that even saying the name aloud is considered slightly blasphemous. You uncap it carefully, watching the viscous liquid glint like a drop of the moon. A single drop is enough. You stir it into the water, and the scent rises instantly, sweet, powdery, faintly spicy. You close your eyes. If divinity has a smell, it's this. Fringe historical tidbit. Blue lotus was believed to have psychoactive properties and was often associated with dreams, ecstasy, and the afterlife. Pharaohs used it in both bathing and ceremony. Some modern scholars debate whether it truly induced trance states or simply smelled expensive. Once the bath is ready, a steward enters to inspect. He dips a finger, sniffs the air, taps the linen with 2 fingers, then nods. You exhale. Success. You're dismissed to Marixton floor duty again, but not the floors you know. This time you're assigned to the Kalkam Hall of Offerings, where high priests are preparing for the Kab Sun feast. A midday ceremony in honor of Ra, the sun god. That means sweeping petals, collecting wax drippings from spent candles, and rearranging symbolic items that you must not knock over. Ever. You tiptoe around clay bowls of grain-dried figs, carved wooden geese, and little boats made of gold leaf. Each item represents something: sustenance, fertility, the journey to the afterlife. None of it is dinner. All of it is sacred. You sweep around them like your life depends on it. It might. Mainstream historical fact. The Hall of Offerings was a central chamber in many temples and palaces where current symbolic goods were presented to gods. On behalf of the pharaoh, these rituals weren't just spiritual, they were political affirmations of the ruler's favor with the divine. A priest brushes past you, trailing a cloud of incense. He mutters something in Old Egyptian that you don't quite catch. You nod anyway. It seemed respectful. Then someone yells from across the courtyard. The scribe's papyrus is ruined. Great. You shuffle toward the scribal wing. Turns out someone knocked over an ink pot soaking the scroll with trade tallies from Lower Nubia. A guard is fuming. The scribe is dramatically holding his head. You're holding a sponge and trying not to look guilty by association. The papyrus can't be saved, but you can copy what's left. Yes, you. Why? Because you're literate. Just barely. Enough to transcribe from water-stained glyphs onto fresh parchment, while the scribe mutters corrections behind you and chews loudly on a date. You concentrate. Every symbol is a guess and a prayer. Fringe detail. Some palace servants, especially those born in scribal households, were taught basic literacy so they could assist in emergencies or act as silent aides. They were often invisible to history, their names lost even as their handwriting endured. You finish the scroll. You set it aside. The scribe grunts. You missed a reed stroke on the 10th symbol. You don't argue. You bow, and you go. You're told to return to the auto entrance portico. Something about new tribute arriving. As you reach the grand steps of the palace, sunlight blasts you in the face. The tribute party is already halfway inside camels' linen-wrapped chests and sweating porters with wide eyes. They've brought obsidian, baskets of spices, a monkey in a gold collar that immediately bites someone. You step forward with a jar of cold water for the dignitaries. They ignore you, of course. You bow anyway, because that's your job, because you're not royalty. You're the one who makes royalty look good. And if you're lucky, you'll survive another hour without someone calling your name. You turn your back on the tribute procession, just as the monkey throws a fig at a high priest. It splatters across the white limestone like a tiny declaration of war, but you wisely keep walking. That's above your pay grade. And frankly, you're just relieved it wasn't aimed at you. Your next assignment finds you in the palace, textile chamber, where bolts of linen are stored and tunics are inspected for royal wear. The room smells like lavender and starch, and the air is thick with tiny lint particles that cling to your face like affectionate moths. You're not here to dress anyone. No, your job is to fold. Perfectly, repeatedly, for hours. There are rules. Fold with the embroidered edge visible. Creases must line up like the banks of the Nile. Never wrinkle the linen with your breath. Yes, that's apparently possible. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian linen was considered among the finest in the ancient world. Prized not just for clothing, but for rituals, mummification, and trade. Royal linen in particular was bleached, scented, and sometimes even magically blessed before being worn. You fold, you stack, you realign. You refold because your stack wasn't graceful enough. A seamstress eyes your work and clicks her tongue. You've offended her with an imperfect pleat. You redo it. Silently. Just when you think you're done, someone delivers a note. Prepare the Pharaoh's pavilion for the afternoon rest. Now this is dangerous, because the Pharaoh's private pavilion is sacred territory. If you dust the wrong surface, if you move a cushion without permission, if you enter before the appointed hour, well, let's just say there are stories, whispers, legends involving scorpions in sandals and mysterious disappearances into the crocodile moat. But you go. You always go. You enter quietly, bowing at every threshold. The air inside is thick with cool myrrh and silence. No guards, no voices. Just you, a broom made of woven reeds, and a list of tasks written in symbols even the scribe wouldn't want to interpret. You dust the windowsills, sweep the floor, realign the incense burners. The pillows must be fluffed, but only with your hands flat. No fists, no kneading. Only flat palms, like smoothing sand before the tide returns. Fringe tidbit royal sleeping areas were often elevated and surrounded by lotus-lined pools or bird-filled gardens to ensure peace and divine dreams. Some believe certain pharaohs slept in shifts timed with sun and moon cycles to maximize cosmic alignment. You exit without making a sound. You return to the servants' hall just in time to be handed a headdress. Not for you, obviously. For the pharaoh's cousin, who apparently changed his outfit midday and now wants his lapis headband delivered with haste. You run. The headband is heavier than you expected, braided gold and lapis beads that shimmer like frozen stars. You cradle it like a newborn as you wind through corridors and avoid a group of dancers rehearsing for the evening feast. One nearly steps on your foot. You nearly drop the headband. You don't. Victory! You deliver the item. No thank you. Just a sniff. Fine. You pass a water basin and splash your face. You're halfway back when a guard stops you. We need hands for canopy assembly. The banquets tonight. Canopy. Assembly. Banquet. You sigh. Of course. Out in the east garden. The banquet area is chaos. Cushions are flying, musicians are tuning, cooks are shouting, and in the center a group of servants wrestle with what looks like the world's largest tablecloth. The ceremonial canopy. Your job: hold the corner pole steady while the others attach the fabric and secure it with cords. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. The wind picks up. The cloth flaps. Your pole slips. Someone yells, "Don't let it touch the ground." You jump, catch it midair. Your sandals slip in the mud. But you recover. Mainstream historical fact. Royal banquets weren't just meals. They were public displays of prosperity, cosmic order, and divine favor. Every piece of furniture, fabric, and flame had symbolic value. Even a tilted canopy could be seen as a bad omen. Finally, it's done. The canopy stands tall. Rich indigo and gold threads ripple above you like the wings of Horus himself. You step back, admire it. Then, back to the kitchen. Prep crew needs help, because of course, the kitchen is hotter than the sun and twice as loud. You're handed a giant spoon and told to stir a vat of lentil stew that smells equal parts delicious and slightly burnt. You stir. You dodge a cook who nearly slaps you with a leek. You slice figs. You polish goblets. You refill jugs of barley beer until your arms ache. Fringe tidbit banquet preparation sometimes included performative cooking, where dishes were flamboyantly served, sliced, or stirred in front of guests as a kind of edible theater. If you mess up, you ruin the scene, the story, the symbol. You finally escape into the outer court, hands sticky with dates and sweat. The sun is lowering, casting long golden beams through the columns. You lean against a cool wall. Someone hands you a damp cloth. No words, just sympathy. You wipe your face, your eyes. You look up at the sky and wonder, not for the first time, how many more hours until sleep? The banquet begins with a drumbeat that echoes through your ribcage like a warning. You're not seated. You're not even invited. But you are present, standing just out of sight in the shadows of the courtyard colonnade, clutching a folded linen napkin and waiting to refill a goblet or whisk away a half-gnawed fish head the moment it's abandoned. The guests arrive in waves, nobles in pleated linen, perfumed officials, even visiting envoys with skin like sun-baked clay and eyes that sweep the palace with silent judgment. Everyone bows low to the Pharaoh, who sits on a throne carved with lions and sun discs, casually receiving 10 kinds of wine. While you can't even smell your dinner without being reprimanded. Mainstream historical fact. Pharaoh's feasts weren't just indulgences, they were statecraft. Banquets reinforced political ties, displayed wealth, and allowed the elite to witness the pharaoh's divine favor firsthand. They were part performance, part ritual, and part test of endurance for everyone involved. Your job tonight: table maintenance. You circulate like a ghost. Eyes always scanning ears, tuned for snapping fingers or a clapped demand. You clear empty plates, refill cups, and gently nudge a sleepy dog back under the table where it belongs. The smells are torturous: roasted duck, glazed with pomegranate molasses, grilled river fish stuffed with garlic, and mint honey cakes dusted with cinnamon. Every scent feels personal, like it's mocking your grumbling stomach. A servant beside you whispers, "I think I just saw a goose blink at me." You nod. That tracks. A guest snaps his fingers. You hurry over. He gestures vaguely at a spilled smear of dates. You wipe it. He doesn't even glance your way. Fringe tidbit. It was common for Pharaoh's guests to toss bones or scraps on the floor, to be cleaned up immediately by servants. Leaving a mess was seen as a mark of luxury, cleaning it without complaint, a mark of your station. Someone belches loudly. Laughter follows. You do not laugh. In the center of the court, a dancer begins to spin veils, fluttering like petals. Music swells, harps, sistrums, flutes, all perfectly timed, none of it accidental. You're beckoned again. A goblet, a stain, a napkin folded the wrong way. You handle it all. The moon climbs. Your feet ache. Your vision blurs slightly from the smoke curling off every incense burner. Then someone drops a plate. Clay shatters against stone. You freeze. Everyone looks. The noble who dropped it is very still. Then laughter erupts. A performer makes a joke. The tension breaks. The feast resumes. You exhale. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh himself ever acknowledged individual servants at these events. Some say he gave gifts to favorites. Others insist he barely saw the help. You're inclined to believe the latter. If Pharaoh knows your name, it's probably a bad sign. Eventually, the food slows. The wine deepens. Guests recline. Some start nodding off, lulled by the music and moonlight. The feast is winding down. You begin clearing. Bones, fig skins, stained napkins, and half-melted beeswax from the candles. You stack the plates with surgical precision. A wrong move and the sound of one dropped dish could undo a night's worth of invisibility. You carry the trays to the scullery. The kitchen is now a battlefield of grease-spilt oil and snoring cooks. A dog licks a lamb bone on the floor. You ignore it. Not your department. You wash the plates, or try to. The water's cold. The soap is gone. You scrub with sand and elbow grease, then wipe each plate with a linen cloth that might once have been white. Fringe detail Egyptian kitchens used natron or crushed sand as scouring agents. Soap wasn't common. Cleaning was physical, repetitive, and relentless, and you had to pretend not to hate it. An older servant pats your shoulder. Almost done. You don't cry, but it's close. You return to the court one last time to check for stragglers. A noble still hums to himself beside a torch. A musician snoozes harp still on his chest. The dancer is gone. The Pharaoh has retreated. The throne is empty. The canopy flutters in the warm breeze. You stand there a moment just breathing. The stars are ridiculous tonight, too bright, too numerous, like someone spilled powdered sugar on a sheet of black velvet. You think this is the closest you'll get to peace. Then someone clears their throat behind you. Laundry chamber, spillage, of course. You turn, walk. Do not sigh out loud. In the laundry chamber, a linen tunic has been dropped in honeyed beer. How, why, you don't ask. You just grab a jar of river water and begin the rinse cycle, your arms red and raw from scrubbing your mind, somewhere near a Nile Delta fishing village you've never even seen. Mainstream historical fact. Royal garments were hand-washed by servants using river water and natural enzymes, often in shifts that rotated based on moon cycles or festival schedules. The penalty for staining a tunic permanently varied, but never fun. Finally, the tunic is salvaged. You hang it to dry. It drips steadily into a clay basin. You lean against the wall. The lantern above you flickers. You let your head fall back. You close your eyes for 10 seconds. Then someone calls. You don't even hear the words. You just know it's not sleep time yet. It's about next task, one time. You shuffle into the corridor like a ghost wearing sandals. The walls lit by the dim orange breath of flickering oil lamps stretch on forever, or at least long enough to feel like they do. Your limbs are heavy not just from labor but from the constant mental arithmetic of what can go wrong next. The next task arrives as a whisper. Prepare the ceremonial perfumes. Wonderful. You veer off toward the high fragrance chamber. A space so delicate it might as well exist in a dream. Inside, the air is thick with rose cinnamon cedar wood and the unmistakable floral sweetness of blue lotus. There are no loud voices here. No clanging plates or shouted orders, just rows of tiny alabaster jars arranged like soldiers of aroma, each labeled with curling hieroglyphs that probably say things like sacred offering or don't mess this up. Mainstream historical fact. Perfumes in ancient Egypt weren't just for masking odors, they were used in religious rituals, embalming, courtship, and even legal ceremonies. Recipes were closely guarded, and certain blends were reserved solely for the pharaoh and gods. Your job is simple on paper. Warm the resins over a flame, press them into oil, and stir until the scent blooms. In practice, it's alchemy with the stakes of a public beheading. You crush myrrh using a bronze mortar, then add oil from the sacred basin. The texture has to be just right, not too grainy, not too slick. You heat the blend with a delicate clay spoon over a brazier, careful not to scorch it. One puff of burnt oil and the entire temple could smell like disappointment for a week. A senior perfumer watches you. She doesn't blink. You hand her the final result. She sniffs, nods, says nothing, which in this chamber is high praise. You exit as quietly as you entered and are immediately pulled aside by a courier. The Coq Royal sandals need cleaning. Sand damage, of course they do. You're escorted to a side room lined with shelves of footwear, each pair more ridiculous than the last gold leaf soles. Turquoise inlays, crocodile skin straps that look suspiciously like they still have teeth. The Pharaoh's sandals are laid out on a cushion like the world's least comfortable throne. They are covered in fine sand from this morning's blessing ritual by the Nile. You are handed a brush made from woven reeds and a soft cloth and told in no uncertain terms, do not scratch. You hold your breath and begin. Fringe tidbit. Ancient Egyptians considered sandals a sign of status and power. While most commoners went barefoot, pharaohs had sandal bearers, whose sole job was to manage their footwear. Some were buried with their own mini shrines and sandal-shaped amulets. You brush gently, every stroke deliberate. One servant beside you is polishing toe rings. Another is restitching a feathered strap that snapped mid-ceremony. Apparently a priest tripped over it. You're sworn to secrecy. The sandals are finally clean. You place them back on their cushion. Step away like they might explode. Someone claps twice. New job. The sacred canopy poles need checking before the moonrise rite. Back to the courtyard. You've now walked more miles. Within this palace than most villagers do in their entire lives. The poles are carved with protective symbols, said to ward off evil spirits during moon ceremonies. But two have begun to tilt from last week's storm, and if they fall during the ritual, well, no one wants to explain that to the gods. You dig at the base with a wooden wedge, reposition the stones, and check the stability by leaning your full weight into the base. It holds. Then someone passes you a chati linen veil to drape across the poles. It's supposed to catch moonlight and shimmer like divine breath. You stretch it carefully. It billows perfectly. For a second, the entire structure looks like something out of a dream, sacred, silent, glowing. You stare at it too long, because behind you, clatter. You turn. One of the lesser priests has dropped a copper offering tray, sending prayer stones skittering across the ground. He glares at you like it's somehow your fault. You kneel and help him gather them anyway. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian rituals were often timed with celestial events. Moonrise ceremonies invoked Khonsu, the moon god, to bring protection, fertility, and peace. Even the placement of canopies, incense, and lighting mattered deeply. You finish right before the stars begin to blink across the purple-black sky. You're told to light the offering torches. The torches are tall, each standing in a carved stone holder. You use a long taper dipped in oil to touch flame to each one. The fire catches slowly, then dances high, casting flickers of orange across the linen veils and sandstone walls. The priest begins to chant. You step back. You watch. The ritual unfolds. For once, you're not carrying anything, not scrubbing or folding or pretending to understand hieroglyphs. You just stand there, still, silent, small, and oddly whole, fringe detail. Some historians speculate that long-term servants, despite their brutal routines, found spiritual solace in being so near to divine rituals, even if they couldn't participate. The proximity to the sacred, the rhythm of ceremony became its own strange kind of purpose. You let the thought linger, then a soft voice breaks the calm back to linens. Dawn prep begins now. Of course it does. You nod and turn toward the servant quarters once again. The stars haven't faded yet, but your day has already started again. You've lost track of when one ends and the next begins. That's the thing no one tells you about being a Pharaoh's servant. The sun might rise and set, but your time doesn't belong to the sky. It belongs to whoever calls your name. And someone just did. Linen chamber, inspection. You don't bother replying, you just walk. The linen chamber by now feels more like a second home. If home had sharp corners, the permanent scent of starch, and a matron who could wrinkle your soul with a single squint. You arrive to find a stack of garments laid out like offerings. There are robes, kilts, sashes, all pressed and pleated like sacred origami. Today's job: double-check the royal wardrobe before it's transferred to the Pharaoh's changing room for the morning's public procession. Mainstream historical fact: pharaohs held regular public appearances where they paraded in sacred attire to reaffirm their divine status. Each garment had symbolic meaning, and dressing errors weren't just embarrassing, they were considered omens. You begin the inspection, fold by fold, thread by thread. A sash is slightly crooked. You fix it. A robe smells faintly of fish oil. You swap it. No one thanks you. But again, that's not why you're here. Once the inspection's passed, you and two others carry the bundles of cloth to the royal changing room. It's a space more ornate than most temples' gold-framed mirrors, lapis lazuli tiles, and a ceiling painted with birds mid-flight. You're not allowed to watch the dressing process. Only the royal dresser and a priest are permitted inside. So you wait just beyond the curtain, holding your breath each time someone steps in or out, praying none of your folds unravel under pressure. Eventually, the pharaoh emerges. You keep your eyes down, but you still glimpse it: the linen cloak embroidered with falcons, the beaded collar glowing like dawn, the ceremonial crook and flail resting in gloved hands. He glides rather than walks, flanked by guards and dancers, and for a moment, the palace feels like it's holding its breath. He is both man and myth, and you're part of the scaffolding that holds the myth aloft. You follow the procession at a respectful distance, tasked with handling the just-in-case basket. A woven container filled with emergency supplies, extra linen-scented oil, a spare headpiece, and yes, makeup. Fringe tidbit: pharaohs wore elaborate cosmetics during public events, not just for appearance, but to ward off evil spirits and reflect divine beauty. Kohl malachite and henna were applied like armor for the eyes and face. You trail the crowd out to the Cheptipoxini temple steps, where the pharaoh will address the people, offer a blessing, and receive the tribute of lesser officials. It's theater with stakes higher than any pyramid. As he begins his speech, you stand beneath the sun, sweat pooling at your spine, gripping your basket, like it's the last tangible thing in your life. The plaza is packed. Commoners, merchants, children clutching lotus stems, all gazing upward with reverence. It's as though the entire world has shrunk to this single moment. You hear the chants, the rhythm of drums, the murmur of the crowd as the pharaoh raises his arms. A breeze cuts through the heat. A corner of his cloak lifts. Your stomach drops. You rush forward and pin the fabric discreetly with a gold clasp from the basket. No one sees, which is the goal. Mainstream historical fact: court protocols included specific invisible interventions, servants trained to step in during ceremonies without disrupting the divine image. It was considered an art form of silent speed and discretion. When the ceremony ends, the procession reverses. You head back to the palace, this time through the Garden of Papyrus, a shady pathway meant for calming the pharaoh's senses before re-entry. You're instructed to sweep ahead to clear debris. Fallen petals, stray leaves, the occasional lizard carcass. You do this with the reverence of someone sweeping a god's footprints. Fringe detail: some palace gardens were designed with hidden irrigation systems, allowing the plants to bloom year-round. These green corridors were not just for beauty, they were sacred breathing spaces between the worlds of divine and mortal. As the pharaoh disappears inside, you're directed to clean the ceremonial sandals. Once more, Yes, already. The pathway dust clings to the gold and rubies like it's trying to prove a point. You kneel. You polish. You pretend you're not dreaming of sleep. Someone taps your shoulder. Go to the library wing. One of the scrolls has termites. Of course. Because why not? You make your way to the quietest part of the palace, the scribe's sanctuary, where light filters in through tall slits and dust dances in the air like lazy spirits. You find the scroll. You brush it gently. You report the damage. The scribe mutters, "We'll need a copy." You fetch a fresh parchment. You begin to copy, meticulously, letter by letter, word by sacred word. You finish just as the hour bell sounds from the temple tower. You stand, stretch, crack your neck and fingers and maybe your soul. You return the scroll. You are dismissed. No fanfare, no bow. Just the familiar phrase, "Back to the servants' court." And so you go, because no matter how divine the ceremony, how golden the sandals, or how sacred the scroll, you still sleep on a mat beside 6 others in a chamber that smells like barley clay and exhausted hope. The servants' court is a world unto itself. Tucked behind the palace's grandeur, it's quieter, rougher, and always a few degrees hotter than comfort allows. Here the floors are packed, earth the walls unadorned, and the air hums with the shared breath of bodies that never quite rest. You collapse onto your mat, which is thin and unforgiving, but at least familiar. Your bones creak like an old temple door. Your hands stained with ink oil and something that might be pomegranate twitch even in stillness. You tell yourself you'll close your eyes for a minute. Just a minute. But of course, wake up, torch relay, temple wing, because the hot night shift it cost never ended. It just changed uniforms. You rise. Your sandals feel like stone tablets. You follow the flicker of firelight into the Temple of Hathor, where statues smile eternally and priests glide barefoot over polished stone. Your job: light the torch relay path. A line of flame that leads from the main altar to the east gallery. Symbolic fire, living fire. Fire that must not go out. Mainstream historical fact. Temples maintained sacred flames that were never allowed to extinguish, representing eternal divine presence. Specific servants, often considered lower caste, were tasked with keeping them lit even during sandstorms or war. You dip your taper in the master flame. You light the first torch, then the second, then the third. The path comes alive behind you. You move like a shadow puppeteer, animating the corridor with fire. No one speaks. You like it this way. In silence, at least, no one can remind you what you are. The last torch flares to life just as the head priest arrives. He gives a nod. Barely. But still a nod. You turn to leave, only to be intercepted by another message. A statue is cracked in the storeroom. Urgent. Statue, cracked, urgent. You don't know what that means yet, but your feet already do. You arrive in a stone chamber filled with Maukaditan Dutitant, deities mid-restoration. Lion-headed goddesses, ibis-faced sages, and one particularly smug-looking baboon with hieroglyphs etched across its belly. A limestone bust of Cyrus Mahon has split down the side. The supervisor explains that the Chakta ceremony of renewal is tomorrow, and the crack, while small, is sacrilege. You're not a sculptor, of course, but you are now. You're handed plaster paste, fine sand, and a thin bronze blade. Your task: smooth the crack. Make it disappear. Make it look as though divine stone has never known weakness. You work slowly, carefully, breath shallow. Every scrape of the blade feels like a gamble with eternity. Fringe, tidbit temple statues were not just symbols, they were the living vessels. Egyptians believed the gods literally inhabited them. Damaging one was akin to injuring the divine. repairing one a sacred act, or a dangerous one depending on how well it went. You finish smoothing the plaster. You whisper a half-prayer part habit part superstition. You are dismissed once again. This time it's to the Chitaru granary sextum. You groan inwardly. Grain duty. The palace's food stores are massive hundreds of baskets filled with barley, wheat, and emmer. Piled like golden dunes, they must be rotated, sifted, and inspected for pests. Because nothing ruins divine perfection like weevils, you take a woven scoop and begin shifting grain from one basket to another. The chaff floats up in delicate clouds, catching the torchlight like tiny golden ghosts. You find 2 dead beetles. You remove them. You keep going. Mainstream historical fact. Granaries were essential to palace survival. Egypt's wealth was measured in grain, and maintaining fresh stores was a Chakra state priority. Even minor contamination could trigger investigation or punishment. After an hour of scooping, a rodent skitters across the far wall. You pretend you didn't see it. The overseer definitely did. He makes a note on a wooden tally board. You'll probably be blamed for that later. You're sent to fetch palm wine. For the guards on the western wall, it's a small mercy. The outer corridors are cooler. The stars above are huge now, closer somehow. Hung low over the horizon like grapes just out of reach. You find the wine jug. It's heavier than expected, so you carry it with both hands, careful not to spill. The guards don't thank you. One takes a loud gulp. The other stares at you with the look of someone who has forgotten what comfort feels like and is a little bitter that you haven't. Back to the court. Your mat is still there, empty. You fall onto it with a soft whoomp. Your eyes close. Then, someone's collapsed near the incense racks. Of course they have. You go. Because you're not just a servant. You're Sigta gear in the divine machine. The person is fine, just faint from the heat. You help them to their mat, prop their head up, dab their forehead with water. They mumble something. You nod. And only then, only once you know they'll breathe through the night, do you return to your corner. One corner, one mat, one breath, and maybe just maybe an hour of sleep. Your eyes snap open to the sound of something. Was it a shout? A bell? No, it's the whack of a broom against sandstone, followed by a voice barking. Servants up, royal courtyard, scrub down. It's still dark, or barely light. The kind of gray-blue haze that makes everything feel like a hallucination. You sit up and blink. Your joints resist like they've unionized overnight. You drag yourself upright and shuffle once again into motion. The courtyard is enormous, an open rectangle flanked by columns where the Pharaoh occasionally walks at dawn to contemplate the lotus, which is noble speak for pacing around while servants scrub every inch of stone so his sandals stay pristine. You're handed a fibrous brush and a bucket of soapy water that smells vaguely like fermented flowers and regret. You kneel and begin scrubbing small, circular motions over and over as the dawn light begins to stretch across the pillars like syrup. Mainstream historical fact. Palace courtyards were kept immaculately clean, not just for appearances, but because they were believed to represent Ma'at, the divine principle of balance and order. Dirt wasn't just mess, it was cosmic disarray. The floor is uneven. Your knees ache. A beetle walks by and you envy its free will. Then comes the hawk poop, on the stone, right in the center of the courtyard. You stare at it. The other servants stare at it. No one moves, because this particular spot is where the Pharaoh begins his morning walk. The hawk, likely sacred, is not to blame. You are, or will be. So you spring into action scrubbing like your soul depends on it, because it might. Someone mutters, "At least it wasn't the crocodile." You don't ask. You don't want to know. Once the courtyard is clean enough to eat off of, though of course no one ever would, you're sent to the Pharaoh's garden. to trim the papyrus. Yes, with a blade, individually. The garden is beautiful in that suffocating way expensive things often are. Water lilies float serenely pink and white and smug. Herons perch like decorative statues. You kneel beside the papyrus reeds and begin to cut slowly, precisely, each stroke reviewed by a supervisor who apparently trained under a deity. Fringe tidbit. Ancient Egyptian gardens were not just ornamental, they were considered microcosms of the universe. Representations of order in chaos. Papyrus in particular symbolized creation and rebirth. Trimming it improperly was said to bring bad luck. Halfway through, a snake slithers past your ankle. You freeze. It keeps going. You resume. You're starting to think, the only thing that hasn't tried to kill you today is the sun. But then it hits the top of the sky, and suddenly that's up for debate too. You're soaked in sweat. The garden supervisor calls a break. You're allowed a cup of barley water, which you drink like it's the nectar of immortality. Someone near you asks, "Do you think Pharaoh even knows our names?" Another replies, "I hope not." Because when Pharaoh knows your name, it usually means you've made a mistake. And mistakes can mean removal. And removal is a word that comes with a lot of quiet rumors and nervous silences. You're told to help reset the sunshade pavilion near the reflecting pool. It's made of stretched linen pulled taut over tall wooden beams. It's a two-person job. You hold the pole. Another servant climbs to tie the corners. It tips. The pole jerks. You catch it. The servant doesn't fall, but he curses you under his breath anyway. You nod. Accept it. The pavilion goes up. Shade returns. A breeze moves across the pool, sending soft ripples across the mirrored surface. You stop to watch it for a second too long. A voice barks, "You bread ovens." Now. You flinch, and off you go. The kukundraten, bread ovens, are round domed clay structures that radiate a heat best described as inside of Ra's armpit. Your job: feed the fire, knead the dough, shape it into loaves of flatbread, and not pass out while doing so. Mainstream historical fact. Bread was the cornerstone of the Egyptian diet and currency. Palace servants baked thousands of loaves weekly, some plain, some with dates, others ritually shaped for offerings. Burnt loaves could be considered an insult to the gods. You knead, you shape, you slide the loaves in, you count the seconds, you pull them out. You only burn 2. That's a win. You deliver the basket to the outer chamber and head straight into the next task: polishing bronze mirrors. The mirrors are heavy and impossible to clean without leaving fingerprints. They must shine like the surface of still water. You hold one up, see your own face, eyes, hollow hair, frizzed smudge on your cheek. You don't fix it. You just keep polishing. Fringe detail Egyptian mirrors weren't glass. They were highly polished bronze or copper. Seeing your reflection was considered a spiritual act, especially in rituals where the soul was expected to recognize itself. You finish. You report in. You're told to head to the kutchamonin ceremonial hallway, and that's when your heel gives out. You stumble, catch yourself on a pillar. Nobody notices, or maybe they do and choose not to care. You walk slower now, more careful, like your body's trying to whisper, "That's enough." But you keep going, because being a Pharaoh's servant doesn't end until Harku. You drag your feet toward the ceremonial hallway, a corridor lined with statues that seem to watch your every move. Their obsidian eyes reflect torchlight in a way that makes you feel judged, even though you're the one hauling the incense braziers into position for tonight's ritual. The hallway smells like centuries of prayers and sweat. It's beautiful, yes, but not the kind of beauty that comforts. This is the kind that demands things, like silence, like reverence, like you You place the braziers exactly where the overseer points 6 paces apart facing east. Each one must be filled with a precise mixture of cedarwood frankincense and ground lotus petal. Too much of any one, and the room smells like a tavern. Too little, and the gods might take offense. Mainstream historical fact. Ritual incense mixtures were formulaic, often recorded on temple walls. Some included resins imported from Punt, now believed to be modern-day Somalia. The complexity of these blends was not just olfactory, it was theological. You grind the ingredients by hand, using a pestle the size of your forearm. You breathe through your mouth to avoid choking on the dust, even as the scent rises around you like fog. One of the braziers sparks too early. You panic, blow on it. The flame settles. You avoid eye contact with the priest who saw it. The hallway begins to fill with smoke and song. The ritual will start soon. But not for you. You're sent next to the storeroom, where dozens of ceremonial items are kept under lock and seal. Ankhs, scepters, canopic jar replicas, polished stones said to channel divine energy, most of it wrapped in linen and stacked like holy leftovers. A shipment just arrived from the southern provinces. Your job, Tatukla. Inventory, it's. You unfold each bundle. You match it to a painted tablet listing what was expected. 3 lapis amulets, 2 alabaster flasks, 4 jars of honey. Except there's only 3 jars of honey, ha kitsem. You blink. Check again. Still 3. You make a note. Quietly. Fringe tidbit. Honey was sacred in Egypt, not just food, but offering. It was believed to never spoil, symbolizing eternal life. Missing a jar wasn't just an inventory error. It was borderline blasphemy. You seal the bundles. Sign your name on the clay tag using a reed stylus dipped in ink. You return the list. No one asks about the honey. That makes you more nervous. Back in the courtyard, you're told to prepare the Pharaoh's travel litter. Apparently, there's a procession scheduled to a nearby temple complex, and the Pharaoh will be carried not riding, not walking, carried by 8 men over a mile of rough terrain. You are not one of the bearers, but you are the harem hastumpilitus saniacum. Padding fluffer. Yes, that's a job. The litter made of gold and cedarwood rests atop 4 poles and is layered with silk cushions, palm-stuffed bolsters, and animal skins. You test each pad for softness by pressing it with your elbow, adjusting the placement, so Pharaoh doesn't feel the weight of any seam or buckle. It is somehow deeply political. The wrong bump could make the Pharaoh frown, and a frown could ruin your day or your career. You finish the prep just as the guards arrive to secure the route. You're not allowed to follow. So you stand by the gates watching the column disappear into a cloud of ceremonial dust. Mainstream historical fact. Pharaohs often made ritual journeys to other temples, even within city limits. These journeys reinforced religious power structures and reminded the people of Pharaoh's connection to the gods. Everything down to the padding on the litter was a symbol. You're told to sweep the entrance gallery. Next, it's where visitors arrive, where petitions are delivered, where foreign dignitaries wait to be ignored. The floor is polished stone, and your broom is made from bound date palm fibers. You sweep quietly, occasionally nodding at the guards who never nod back. Halfway through, a scribe enters, trailing a cloud of dried papyrus shavings and arrogance. He drops a scroll. You pick it up. He takes it without thanks. You resist the urge to mutter something rude. Barely. Fringe detail. The Egyptian palace hierarchy was so rigid, even a once low-ranking scribe could reprimand a high-performing servant. Their connection to knowledge was seen as nearly sacred, even when wielded like a stick. You finish sweeping. You are told to help with the window shutters. The upper shutters of the east wing are jammed, and the next ritual needs a full shaft of sunlight to land on the altar. Timing is key. You climb the narrow stairwell with two others, each of you hauling a wedge, a mallet, and a strong sense of déjà vu. You brace the shutter, strike the wedge, the wood creaks. Light explodes into the room like a spotlight from the gods. You step back. You almost smile. You feel usefully small. By now the sky is amber. You're allowed a short break. You sit on a step near the servant quarters, your back against a sun-warmed wall. Someone passes you a fig. You eat it slowly, like it's the last luxury you'll ever know. And in that moment it is. The fig is gone too quickly. Its sweetness lingers just long enough to remind you that most of your meals don't taste like anything at all, just a vague texture between barley and fatigue. You stretch your legs, but before your spine can fully unfurl, the call comes again. Back to the wow from Bedtime. Embalming storeroom. Something's leaking. Of course it is. You've never been to this room before. Only certain servants are permitted near the embalming chambers. It's sacred ground, normally reserved for priests and specialists. But when something leaks, sacred or not, it still needs to be cleaned. You step in and the air changes. Cooler, still. Smells of resin, salt, and mystery. Jars line the shelves, alabaster clay, bronze-topped, each labeled with elegant glyphs denoting their gruesome contents. Natron oils, unguents, resins. Several have dark stains pooling at their bases. Someone didn't seal the lids. You're handed linen rags and a jar of vinegar water. Your instructions: wipe carefully. Don't inhale too deeply. Mainstream historical fact. Embalming materials were often toxic. Bitumen, natron, and myrrh were effective preservatives, but prolonged exposure could cause nausea, headaches, or worse. Servants sometimes grew ill just working near them. You move slowly, dabbing, wiping, folding the rag neatly before it soaks through. Your skin itches. You don't scratch. The room is utterly silent, save for the soft clink of ceramic on stone and your own breathing. Behind you, a mummified ibis sits on a shelf like a papery sentinel, its beak curled downward in eternal judgment. You mutter, "I didn't spill it," just to feel like someone's on your side. Fringe tidbit. Animals like ibises, cats, and baboons were often mummified alongside humans, sometimes as pets, sometimes as divine offerings, and occasionally as living avatars of gods. Their presence in storage rooms was both practical and deeply symbolic. You finish the cleanup and are instructed to carry one of the sealed jars to the Chokumkup prayer basin for purification. You hold it like a baby. Your arms ache, but you dare not drop it. You reach the basin, shaped like a blooming lotus filled with water, so still it looks painted. You pour one drop. Just one. A priest murmurs a blessing. You step back and disappear. Because you were never meant to be there anyway. Next, you're pulled into laundry duty. But not the normal kind. This is the high-stakes kind. The Pharaoh's ceremonial headcloth needs emergency pressing before sunset. Why? Apparently someone sat on it. There are whispers it was the vizier's son. But no one says it out loud. You're handed the crumpled cloth. It's striped in indigo and saffron, made from the kind of linen that's thinner than a sigh. You lay it across a warm stone slab and begin misting it gently with rose water, smoothing the wrinkles with a burnishing shell. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian linen was woven so finely it was considered semi-transparent and was a major export. The finest garments, especially headcloths like the neems, could take weeks to weave, and their symbolic weight was immense. Each pass of the shell makes you feel like you're trying to polish light itself. You finish, just in time. The cloth is whisked away by trembling hands. No one says thank you, but they don't say redo it either, which is practically a blessing. You're moved next to the carpet corridor, where visitors from Nubia are expected to arrive shortly. The palace has unrolled a woven carpet of deep reds and ochres down the main hall. Your job? Petal scatterer. Yes, that's a job too. You carry a small basket filled with dried blue lotus petals and crushed hibiscus. Every 2 steps, you toss a pinch across the carpet in a precise arc. Too much and it looks desperate. Too little and it looks cheap. The stakes are weirdly high for something that's mostly decorative. Fringe detail. Petal scattering was a symbolic gesture of welcome and reverence. Originally reserved for gods and later extended to nobility. Certain blends were thought to confuse evil spirits by masking footsteps. You finish just as the foreign guests arrive, tall, regal, draped in gold-threaded robes and carrying gifts in lacquered chests. You bow low, don't look up, but you hear them murmur in appreciation. You feel it like a stolen sip of wine. Then you're gone again, sent to the Chak sundial courtyard. To fetch the mid-afternoon time reading. Why? Because the priests need to know the exact moment to start the Chak sacred shadow rite. And apparently, none of them want to leave the shade. The sundial stands like a sleeping obelisk, its stone finger casting a long shadow across numbered grooves. You mark the position on a palm leaf strip and run it back. Mainstream historical fact. Timekeeping in ancient Egypt was surprisingly advanced. They used shadow clocks, water clocks, and astronomical observations. Important ceremonies were often tied to specific light patterns and shadow lengths. The priest reads your leaf, nods, dismisses you with a flick. Back you go, through corridors and gates past rooms you're not allowed to enter, and ones you wish you weren't. You pass the so-animal courtyard, where royal pets are groomed greyhounds, cranes, even a lion cub who eyes you with curious disapproval. You nod at it. It blinks. You keep walking. The sun is dropping now. Longer shadows, softer light. You're sent to prepare the chatzim evening oil lamps. There are dozens, maybe 100. Each must be filled with sesame oil, the wick trimmed, and the glass hood wiped clean with a cloth soaked in cedar vinegar. Your fingers move on muscle memory now. You finish the lamps just as the first star peeks out above the palace dome. And as you light the first one, something inside you relaxes, not much, but just enough. The day is almost done, which means soon you might rest. Maybe. The last of the oil lamps flickers to life, sending a golden ripple across the columned hallway, like fire learning to dance. You breathe out softly, reverently. It's a small triumph in a day stitched together with tedium and sweat. But it doesn't last. Because as soon as you place your lamp wick basket back into the storeroom, a messenger grabs your elbow gently but firmly. Bathhouse. Pharaoh's sandals are missing. You blink. I'm sorry, what? The ceremonial pair. He wore them during the blessing this morning. They're gone. You nod slowly as if sandals could just vanish like wisps of incense. Still, you're already jogging toward the whole royal bathhouse, where steamy shadows blur the line between sacred ritual and accidental chaos. The floor is slick with perfumed water. Servants rush about with towels and basins. You locate the platform where the sandals were last seen. 2 elegant outlines remain dusty impressions in the tile like ghosts that walked off mid-conversation. Mainstream historical fact. Royal sandals weren't just footwear, they were sata, status symbols. Often encrusted with gold leaf or ivory, and were ritually blessed for ceremonies. Some even bore images of Egypt's enemies, so the pharaoh could symbolically crush them with every step. You follow the trail, around the corner, past the heat chamber, into the drying alcove. There they are, not missing. Reassigned. A junior guard used them to prop open a door. You retrieve them. You don't yell. You don't tattle. You just return them, wipe the souls, and place them in the appointed box, as if none of this ever happened. Because being a servant means keeping other people's mistakes from becoming your punishment. You're told to remain on bathhouse duty for the next hour. This means refilling the fragrant water troughs. Rosewater lotus essence, cedar-infused steam. One by one, you haul ceramic jugs into the heating chamber, your arms trembling, your back tightening. Fringe tidbit. Egyptians often bathed daily not just for hygiene but as spiritual purification. High-status individuals had entire ritual bathing sequences involving specific oils, exfoliating scrubs, and even musical accompaniment. The Pharaoh exits. Everyone bows. You keep your head down until he passes. Then comes the cleanup, scrubbing the stone slab, collecting wet linens, disposing of bath herbs in the ritual refuse pit. Yes, that's a thing. It's dark now. You expect release. But then procession prep. Temple gate. You groan internally. Because night processions are a spectacle. Not just for the people, but for the gods. Every torch must be lit in perfect sequence. Every drum hit in sync. Every step measured like you're dancing across a god's eyelid. Your role, torchbearer's assistant. You carry bundles of fresh reeds dipped in fat and resin. When a torch dims, you relight it. When one sputters, you swap it. You're not seen, but if you fail, everyone notices. Mainstream historical fact. Processions were key public rituals, often aligning with lunar events or major festivals like Opet. Torches played symbolic roles representing divine illumination. Cutting through the darkness of chaos, the night air is crisp, stars above like scattered barley. Drums throb in your ribs, chants echo off temple walls, and in the midst of it, you moving like smoke, relighting the world one flicker at a time. You lose track of time. When it's over, your fingers are blackened with soot and resin, your eyes stinging your throat dry. Someone claps you on the shoulder. Not hard, not gently, just enough to say you did your part. You're dismissed, finally. You walk slowly toward the servants' quarters, every step louder in your bones than in the air. On your way, you're stopped by a kitchen boy, no older than 10, carrying a basket too big for him. He looks panicked. Please, can you take this to the antechamber, the meat platter? It's late. You stare at him. You want to say no, but you nod, because of course. You take the basket laden with roasted duck, honeyed figs, and lentil cakes shaped like tiny fish, and carry it up the stairs to the Martatinturm. North Antechamber, where foreign envoys recline in boredom. You place it on the marble tray table bow and leave without a word. Fringe detail meals served to guests were often arranged with symbolic care. Color, shape, and placement mattered. A misarranged dish could be interpreted as an insult or omen, especially if given to foreign dignitaries. You return the empty basket to the kitchen. Someone hands you a cup of water. No words, just that. It might be the kindest thing you've felt all week. The stars are clearer now. You can see Orion, what Egyptians called Sa, the soul of Osiris rising above the eastern courtyard. You walk beneath it, head tipped back. It doesn't make anything better, but it reminds you that this too will pass. You reach your mat. Lie down. This time no one calls. Not for a minute. Not for an hour. You exhale. Close your eyes. Sleep comes not like a gift, but like permission. You wake before dawn, not because someone calls your name miraculously, they don't, but because your body has become its own alarm bell. Knees throbbing back, stiff, mouth dry. You sit up slowly, groaning like a temple door on rusted hinges. Around you, the other mats rustle. Servants rise one by one in synchronized misery, eyes, puffy limbs slow. Another day. You're summoned to the storeroom vestibule, where a supervisor awaits with a ledger and that grimace that means today's going to be weird. We're short on funerary cones, he says. You blink at him. Cones, clay cones, for the tomb inscriptions. Ah, of course. These are small, hand-formed cylinders stamped with hieroglyphs, meant to be embedded into tomb walls above the doorway. They carry the names and titles of the dead. Your job, mold 200 by dusk. Mainstream historical fact. Funerary cones were a common practice in New Kingdom Egypt, especially for nobles. They served both as architectural adornments and eternal nameplates, ensuring the deceased's identity lived on. The clay is cold and heavy, pulled from storage jars, and dropped with a wet plop onto your board. You begin kneading, rolling, stamping, over and over. It's quiet work, almost meditative. You try not to think about what happens if you misstamp someone's name. The eternal consequences, the haunting, the paperwork. A scribe passes by, glances at your pile and sniffs. Lettering's crooked. You say nothing. You want to say so's your spine, but instead you roll another cone. After 2 hours, you've made 38. Only 162 to go. The heat rises. You remove your overshirt. Your arms are speckled with clay. Your brain is speckled with despair. But then you're interrupted. Not for rest, of course. You're needed in the Kine statue transport bay. Apparently, the Pharaoh has commissioned a new basalt bust of Horus, and it's arriving this morning from the stonecutter's quarter. Your job is to help unload it and wheel it into the southern alcove gently. Fringe tidbit basalt was one of the hardest stones used in Egyptian sculpture. Carving it was painstaking, often reserved for images of powerful gods or kings. Transporting it was no less grueling. The statue arrives on a sled pulled by oxen and coated with wet sand to reduce friction. You and 4 others slide poles beneath its platform, lift, wobble, correct, and begin the slow death march to its pedestal. Each step feels like a heartbeat in your spine. Each pause is a prayer that no one trips. You don't. You reach the base, lower the bust, silence, and then applause. Not from the priests or supervisors, but from the kitchen staff on break, watching from the doorway like a bored theater audience. You take a bow. It's sarcastic, but it helps. You're dismissed back to the scribe alcove, where you're told to help organize a backlog of scrolls. You're not a scribe. You can barely read more than your own name and the basic temple glyphs for carry this, don't touch, and wrong way. But here you are, sorting bundles of brittle papyrus, stacking them in neat rows by color, size, or scent. Yes, some of them smell, which is never a good sign. Mainstream historical fact. Egypt's temples doubled as archives. Scribes recorded offerings, rituals, star charts, taxes, even dreams. Servants occasionally helped with physical maintenance, but were rarely trusted to actually read the contents. You find one scroll labeled with the glyphs for Sun Festival preparations. You try to sneak a peek. It's just inventory: 4 baskets of lotus, 9 strings of beads, 2 barrels of date beer. You're disappointed, then relieved, because if it had been something important, it might have gotten you in trouble. You finish stacking, wipe your hands, and are told to head to the animal enclosures. Because one of the Pharaoh's cranes, yes, the long-legged, sharp-beaked kind, has gotten loose. Of course it has. You jog to the outer garden. There it is, standing defiantly atop a decorative balustrade, looking down like a smug little god. You approach slowly, hands out. It hisses. You pause. It flaps its wings. You lunge. It bolts. The chase lasts 15 minutes. You dive. You miss. You dive again. Finally, you snag one gangly leg and cradle the shrieking bird like a stolen statue. You march it back toward the enclosure, ignoring the other servants, who are now pretending to place bets on whether you'll lose an eye. Fringe detail cranes were considered symbols of vigilance and longevity. often kept in palace gardens. Losing one wasn't just an inconvenience, it could be interpreted as a bad omen for the pharaoh's household. You return the bird, close the gate, check it twice. You exhale, the sun is climbing, and you're sent naturally to the paint chamber. The murals in the inner corridor are flaking again. Your job is to fetch water, hold the paint tray, and fan the pigments, while the actual artisan mixes a fresh batch of mineral color. Malachite for green, ochre for red, crushed lapis for blue. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian murals were painted using mineral-based pigments, mixed with egg resin or water. Murals weren't just decoration, they were magical contracts, showing the pharaoh's power and ensuring the afterlife went according to plan. You accidentally sneeze near the red tray. The artisan glares at you like you just cursed their entire lineage. You apologize, offer to remix. They grunt and wave you off. You resume fanning, keeping your face as far from the paint as possible. By mid-afternoon, the mural is vibrant again, a row of lotus flowers unfolding beneath the feet of Ra, painted with such precision it almost feels like the blossoms will sway in the heat. You are dismissed, and as you walk back toward the servant court, sweat-streaked and half-covered in red dust, a passing priest murmurs, "Almost time for the cleansing." You know what that means. You change quickly and head to the sacred pool, because every pharaoh's servant must end their day the way it began, cleaning themselves for the gods. Even if the gods never say thank you, you stand at the edge of the sacred pool, watching ripples chase the moonlight across its surface like ghostly fingers. Around you, other servants disrobe in silence. This isn't for comfort, it's for ritual. You step in. The water is cool, silken, a rare mercy after a day spent beneath Egypt's brazen sun. It wraps around your limbs like a whispered apology from the gods who never seem to care during daylight hours. You submerge yourself up to your chin. Hold your breath. Count to 5, and then surface slow and quiet. Mainstream historical fact: ritual cleansing in pools especially. Purification basins or sacred lakes was integral to temple life. Even those not of priestly status were often required to bathe before entering certain areas or participating in evening ceremonies. You dip a woven cloth into the water, gently wipe your arms, then your face. You scrub beneath your fingernails, behind your ears, and finally rinse the soles of your feet, a symbolic gesture washing away the sins and filth of the day's labor. The air smells faintly of myrrh and blue lotus blossoms. A bird calls in the distance. You hope it's not the crane again. Beside you, another servant quietly hums a temple song, off-key but comforting. You don't join in, but the melody wraps around your thoughts like gauze. Once cleansed, you step out wrapping yourself in a rough linen robe. You're dry before you reach the colonnade, the desert air stealing the last drops of water from your skin. A priest raises a hand not to bless, but to assign, always to assign. You're on shrine polishing, he says. You nod silently, mourning your fleeting sense of peace. You're led to a small side shrine, dedicated to Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and motherhood. The irony doesn't escape you. The shrine's surface is bronze inlaid with turquoise and carnelian. Your task: polish every inch until it gleams like the smile of a deity. Fringe tidbit shrines to Hathor were often placed in hidden niches within larger temples. Her roles were complex: protector of women, mistress of drunkenness, and sometimes feared as the Eye of Ra when angry. You kneel before her image, dip your cloth into a bowl of ground pumice and water, rub in small, careful circles. It's a quiet task, the kind that lets your mind wander. You think of your mother. You think of how she used to polish a clay figure of Isis on your home altar, humming the same off-key melody as the servant in the pool. You blink fast and keep polishing. Eventually, Hathor gleams again, Your reflection warps across the curved bronze. You look like a stranger with tired eyes and red fingertips. You're allowed a quick meal before your next assignment. You sit beneath the fig tree near the servant court, chewing yesterday's lentils with the resignation of someone who's tasted worse. As you eat, you overhear a merchant telling a guard that the Pharaoh's tomb architects are looking for laborers, diggers, and torchbearers. You imagine it carving out stone far from palace politics, just you and the sound of hammer on rock. Then you remember the sandstorms, the collapses, the curses. You chew more slowly. You're interrupted mid-bite by a runner music hall. They need someone to pump the air bellows for the reed organ. Because, of course, you head to the Pharaoh music chamber. A vaulted space lined with alabaster sconces and plastered with frescoes of dancers mid-spin and harps taller than men. The organ stands at the far end, an instrument of carved reeds and hollow channels, its sound breathy and mournful, like a wind caught in a tomb. You crouch behind it, begin pumping. In, out, in, out. The musician plays a soft, wandering melody meant to appease restless spirits. As part of the evening rites. Mainstream historical fact: the hydraulic organ, or aulos-like wind instruments, were rare in Egypt, but present in some ceremonial settings, especially during festivals or high rituals. The air bellows system was manually operated, usually by low-tier servants. You pump steadily for half an hour, your calves, burning arms, trembling. No one sees you, but the music drifts through the palace like incense, weightless, eternal. When it ends, the musician nods without looking. You slink away like a shadow. Outside, the air has cooled. The moon hangs low and ripe over the palms. You're finally released for the night. As you head back, a younger servant stops you. Do you think we'll ever live like them? You don't ask who he means. You just shake your head. Not in this life, you say. Maybe in the next. He laughs like you've told a joke. You don't correct him. Because sometimes letting someone believe in a kinder possibility is the best kindness you can offer. You reach your mat. Your feet throb. Your arms ache. But your hands are clean. And for now, so is your conscience. You lie down facing the stars. And you sleep not because the work is done, but because you are. Your dream is hazy, full of drifting reeds and low chanting voices. You're on a bark, gliding down the Nile, except the river is ink, and the stars above are scribbled with hieroglyphs. You reach out to touch the moon, and it turns into a bowl of lentils. You wake up, biting your pillow. Not the most dignified start. Still, the dawn is soft, rosy light, filtering through the slats of the servant quarters. You sit up, already dreading what unknown duty awaits. And right on cue, a runner appears. New orders. You're joining the funerary goods inventory at the west storeroom. Of course you are. You shuffle to the storeroom, already half sure you'll spend the day surrounded by vases and dust. And you're right, rows and rows of grave goods, stacked meticulously for the next noble's journey into the afterlife. Mainstream historical fact. The Egyptians believed that every essential item for life must also be present in death. Bread, beer combs, mirrors, weapons, even board games. Like Senate. These were buried alongside the dead in elaborate tombs. Your job today, Dust. Count. Record. 1 blue-painted coffin lid, its surface chipped. 3 alabaster jars, 2 empty, 1 suspiciously sticky. A collection of figurines shaped like servants. Ushabtiznu. Carved to do your work in the afterlife. You pause, holding one between your fingers. Fringe tidbit. Some tombs contained hundreds of Ushabtis, each one a stand-in for the deceased's labor obligations in the next world. A kind of celestial outsourcing. Servants carved them, knowing they themselves would never be represented. You stack another crate, then another. Then a high-ranking priest enters the storeroom and barks. "Where's the sistrum?" You blink. "The rattle?" "Yes, for the Say Hathor ceremony." "It was stored here. Now it's not." You glance around helplessly. The sistrum, a ceremonial rattle with a sacred looped handle, has indeed vanished. Guess who gets sent to find it? You scour the side rooms, digging through scroll boxes and oil crates. Finally, behind a half-finished statue of Anubis, you find it wedged in the crook of a priest's sandals like a lazy snake. You don't ask why. You just return it. The priest says nothing. But he doesn't frown either, which might be the closest thing to a thank you you'll ever get. You're reassigned to prunt fan duty. Inside the temple's western alcove, 2 priests are preparing the sacred bull for inspection. Yes, the bull. The animal embodiment of Ptah, or sometimes Apis, depending on who's interpreting the omens that month. Your task: stand on a stool and wave a palm frond fan to keep flies away from the beast's face. Mainstream historical fact: sacred bulls were carefully chosen, pampered, and revered. Their markings, behavior, and even posture were interpreted as signs from the gods. Some lived in royal stalls with attendants, yes, like pharaohs. The bull stares at you. You fan harder. He snorts, unimpressed. Beside you, a priest sprinkles rose petals into a silver dish and chants something low and rhythmic. The bull twitches an ear. You drop your fan. The bull lifts one eyebrow. You scramble to pick it up. The priest coughs. You nod in apology, sweating like a clay pot in a furnace. Eventually, the inspection ends. The bull passes. You're dismissed, but not to rest. Never to rest. A runner appears. The royal barber needs help. You'll assist with beard oils and sharpening blades. Sure, why not? You trot to the grooming chamber, a room filled with small brass tools, scented balms, and an overwhelming smell of cinnamon and goat fat. The barber doesn't speak much. He grunts, points, gestures. You're shown how to lay out the knives in order of sharpness, how to stir the beard oil until the myrrh settles just right, how to press a damp cloth against the jawline before the trim. Fringe, tidbit. Beards in ancient Egypt were meticulously maintained. Pharaohs wore false beards for ceremony, but nobles kept theirs neat, oiled, and scented. Some even dyed them black to appear youthful. You think about your own patchy chin. You sigh and polish the oil jar instead. Just as the trimming ends, someone bursts into the chamber. Flood watch. The river's risen. You're dragged outside, squinting against the sun as chaos brews along the Muchinna. Nile's edge to Tiukupakuntuktinyan. Waters spilling over a low embankment. Baskets float by. Someone's sandals vanish into the mud. You join a line of servants and workers piling sandbags, digging channels, trying to divert the surge back toward the irrigation trenches. Mainstream historical fact: the annual Nile flood was both blessing and curse. It replenished the fields, but unplanned rises could destroy property, drown livestock, or halt temple operations. You plunge a shovel into the soft ground. Heave. Repeat. Again and again. The mud gets into your teeth. Your robe is soaked to your ribs. At one point, a frog hops over your foot. You don't react. You're beyond caring. Finally, after what feels like hours, the waters settle. The channels hold. You wipe your forehead with a hand that smells like river and labor. Someone hands you a hunk of flatbread wordlessly. You chew. You swallow. You stare at the water glinting like polished bronze beneath the noon sun. And for one brief moment, mud-slicked and exhausted, you feel useful. No ceremony, no fanning, no beards, just the Nile, just survival. And sometimes that's the most sacred job of all. You've only just scraped the last of the Nile mud from between your toes when the head servant finds you like a bloodhound that can sniff exhaustion. There's a leak in the granary roof. Of course there is. You sigh, pick up a wooden ladder, and begin the slow trudge to the southern granary, where Pharaoh's store of wheat, emmer, and barley is kept. The building smells like warm dust and old bread, with a whisper of mildew not ideal for food storage. The roof is just thatched palm leaves and clay tiles, many of which now sag from last night's unexpected drizzle. You climb up barefoot for balance and begin repositioning the slats. Mainstream historical fact. Granaries were essential structures in Egypt holding not just food, but wealth. Grain could be used for taxes, wages, offerings, literally a currency of survival. You secure one tile, then another. Then a palm leaf rips beneath your heel, and you plunge straight through the roof, not all the way, thank Ra, but enough to land one leg knee-deep in wheat. From below, someone shouts, "Try not to die. That's next week's assignment." You laugh. You actually laugh, which might be a bad sign. Once patched and bruised, you descend and are rewarded with a gulp of watered beer, thin and lukewarm, but after a fall, everything tastes divine. Next, you guessed it, laundry duty. But not your laundry, oh no. These are the Pharaoh's ceremonial robes. Silk imported from the Levant, dyed with indigo and saffron stitched with tiny lapis beads that come off if you so much as breathe near them. You're given a shallow basin, a lump of natron soap, and a brush made from reeds. You kneel beside the basin and begin the careful, trembling ritual of scrubbing sacred threads. Fringe tidbit. While linen was the dominant fabric in Egypt, imported silks and wools were highly prized by the elite, often reserved for only the most significant festivals or diplomacy events. Servants tasked with laundering them were frequently watched. And yes, someone is watching you. A steward with the personality of a scorpion and the fashion sense of a storm cloud. You finish, hands pruned back aching. You're told to dry the robe in the sun, but gently draped across a marble bench. Not the usual laundry line, as if it's a guest at a royal banquet. The robe dries, you live, somehow. You hope you've earned rest, but instead you hear the temple oxen are missing. You groan so hard it could register on a seismograph. The oxen used in processions plowing sacred fields, and today hauling a statue of Isis to her Muqasham. Harborside altar. Have broken their yoke and wandered toward the orchard. You and 3 others fan out. You spot one in the distance, munching on date palms with all the grace of a drunken war god. You approach carefully, whispering reassurances, holding out a fig like an offering. Mainstream historical fact. Oxen were not only beasts of burden, they were also ritual participants, and sometimes even sacrificed. Losing one, even temporarily, was seen as a serious failure of discipline. You wrangle the ox back, roping it like an awkward dog. The other is trickier, it refuses to move until someone begins singing. A harvest chant. So yes, you sing. Badly, off-key, with passion. It works. You return the oxen, and you're reassigned again to scroll transcription assistance. This does not mean you write. This means you blot ink behind a scribe as he dictates the royal census to another scribe who's already irritated that your cloths are either too wet or too dry. The scroll details household numbers, grain yields, and sheep tallies from the Upper Nile. Somewhere in there is a joke about wool taxes that the scribes laugh at. You do too. You don't get it, but laughter keeps them from blaming you for smudges. Fringe detail. The Egyptian census was less about people and more about land, livestock, and production. Taxes were based on output, not headcount, which is why a wealthy goat could theoretically be worth more than 3 farmers. Hours pass. You're finally dismissed. You walk through the garden, pausing near the lotus pond, where frogs chirp in layers like percussion in a temple band. You want to sit. You almost do. But then someone coughs behind you. It's a palace page. Not much older than 12, face drawn tight with nerves. There's an out-of-town envoy arriving, he whispers. They need someone to stand still. You raise an eyebrow. Just stand. He nods. As part of the welcome procession. You'll hold a banner. Fine. You're placed beside the palace gates in a ridiculous linen headdress and handed a staff with a fluttering emblem of Ra. Your job is to look solemn and majestic as the envoy approaches in a gilded chariot. Mainstream historical fact: foreign dignitaries were greeted with ritualized pageantry, often including music, incense, gift exchanges, and ornate visual displays, some even exaggerated to intimidate or impress. You stand still. The chariot rolls up. You bow. The envoy barely glances at you, but a child in the entourage points and giggles. That one's wobbly. You try not to laugh. Banner duty ends. You head back to your quarters, dragging your feet through soft sand, like you're trying to erase the very idea of motion. The moon is rising again. Someone started a tiny fire in a clay pit. You warm your fingers, breathe in the wood smoke. One servant hums the same temple song you heard near the sacred pool. You hum along this time, not because it helps, but because it feels like something. Tonight the air is heavy with incense and expectation. Something's happening. You can smell it before you even open your eyes: sweet blue lotus sandalwood and the unmistakable tinge of urgency. A senior servant nudges your shoulder up. We're preparing for the Apontsapu. Mid-flood festival. You blink. Didn't we just finish the harvest offering? He shrugs. The Nile waits for no one. You dress in clean linen. You're given a red sash, not yours to keep obviously, and a gilded comb which you're told to pass from one dancer to another during the ceremony. No one explains why. You nod like you understand. Mainstream historical fact: the mid-flood festival, held during the annual inundation of the Nile, honored Hapi, the god of the river. It involved processions, feasting, and ritual bathing to ensure continued fertility of the land. You're shuffled to the temple court, where torches line the colonnades and musicians tune their lyres and harps. The air hums with that strange mix of ceremony and chaos: noblewomen adjusting headdresses, acolytes fussing over baskets of fruit, someone panicking about missing reeds. Your job: background choreography. You pass the comb, step in time, smile, don't trip. One wrong move and a priest might assign you to night latrine duty. For a month. You step into position. The music begins. You sway slowly, arms like river reeds. You pass the comb to a girl with coal-lined eyes and a smirk that says she knows she's better at this than you. She is. But you're still standing, a fringe tidbit. In some regions, symbolic fertility rites were performed during the mid-flood, involving dance partners acting out the courtship of the gods. You suspect that's why your sash is so bright and why you're forced to wear eye makeup tonight. You glance up at the temple facade, lit like gold in the firelight. For a moment, you forget the bruises on your knees and the fact that your last meal was half a fig. You even enjoy yourself. The crowd claps politely as the dance ends. You bow, return the comb, and are immediately told to assist with the feast preparations. Of course you are. You carry trays of fish bread, honeyed dates, and something green and leafy you can't identify. You keep your head down and your steps even. At one point, you sneak a pinch of roasted garlic chickpeas off the edge of a tray. You're caught. The kitchen priest stares, then mercifully says nothing. You resume your path, stomach growling in time with the drums still echoing from the courtyard. Mainstream historical fact: temple feasts weren't just for show. They fed priests, workers, servants, and sometimes even townspeople. Leftovers, however, were reserved for dead offerings or redistributed by hierarchy. You were near the bottom. After the feast, your next duty is bizarre, even by Egyptian standards. Holding mirrors. You're positioned along the walkway near the House of Life, the scribe school and healing center, and told to angle a polished bronze mirror to reflect moonlight into the chamber as part of a cleansing ritual. It's quiet, just you, the moon, and a piece of burnished metal that reflects more of your tired eyes than anything else. You adjust the angle again and again. A priest murmurs, "Perfect." You dare not breathe. Fringe detail. Egyptians believed moonlight held purifying power, especially when focused through reflective surfaces. Mirrors were tools of both vanity and divinity, bridging the mortal world and the unseen. You're finally released from light duty, but not before a final assignment: chalk glyph removal. Apparently during festival prep, a trainee accidentally marked a sacred stele with practice inscriptions. You know, for educational purposes. Unfortunately, the stone was already consecrated. You're handed a cloth and a mixture of water and sour milk. The priest warns, don't let it soak in. You scrub, gently, like you're erasing history one mistake at a time. And honestly, that's how the day feels. You return to your quarters utterly spent. Your robe is stained with wine honey chalk, and something you hope is just fruit paste. You collapse onto your mat, and then just as your eyes begin to close, you hear it. "Servant, no. Please, no." You rise again. A different supervisor this time, eyes narrowed. Someone left a hot lamp burning in the archive. Go. Extinguish it. You shuffle through the temple's dark corridors, guided only by flickering sconces and the occasional snore from a passed-out drunk priest. You find the archive door ajar, a single oil lamp glowing within casting shadows, like ancient ghosts on the walls. You blow it out, silence. But as you turn, your hand brushes against a scroll shelf, and a single papyrus tumbles down. You pick it up, unroll it, just a little. The glyphs read, "May the humble servant be seen in the eyes of the gods." You stare for a moment, then re-roll it gently and tuck it back. You walk home in silence, and you sleep, not because it's comfortable, but because your body refuses to do anything else. Your final dawn in the palace comes quietly. No trumpet blasts, no urgent footsteps, just the slow brightening of the sky over the courtyard wall. You wake to the sound of a broom sweeping sand. Someone's already working. You sit up, body aching in that now familiar way, like your muscles have formed an alliance to complain in unison. You swing your legs off the mat. The stone floor is cool, slightly damp with dew. You stretch, groaning softly, and begin your day. But something feels different. There's its calm, not peace exactly, but an absence of chaos. You're not immediately yanked to the kitchens or the scribe hall or the stables. For a moment, no one is shouting your name. You're handed a task, yes, but it's gentle. Garden duty, a steward murmurs. Sweep the lotus paths. Take your time. You blink. You almost ask if this is a mistake. But instead, you bow slightly and take the broom. Mainstream historical fact. Temple gardens weren't merely decorative, they were sacred spaces often used for ritual plant gathering, meditations, or small-scale ceremonies. Some even represented the field of reeds, the Egyptian version of paradise. You walk to the garden. Petals float on the surface of the pond. The lilies are blooming pale pink and white, their scent faintly sweet. You begin to sweep. Sand leaves a beetle shell. It's simple work, but you find yourself humming, a tune you've heard 100 times now, from servants in the baths or near the sacred pool. You don't know the words, but your body knows the rhythm. Another servant joins you. You nod to each other, no words, just shared rhythm, broom to path. When the garden is clear, you're given one last errand: accompany the Pharaoh's dog, on a walk around the lower compound. The dog, a sleek golden-coated hound, with an attitude more royal than the crown prince, sniffs everything. Trees, statues, your leg. You pretend to be dignified, but you're giggling inside. Fringe tidbit. Egyptian nobles adored their pets. Dogs, cats, even monkeys were pampered. Some had their own servants, burial tombs, and even jewelry. Pharaoh's dogs were often trained for ritual appearances or hunting games. You walk the dog in the early morning hush past whitewashed walls and date palms swaying in the breeze. It stops suddenly, looks up at you, wags once, and trots back toward the palace like it owns the world. You return to the servants' quarters. Someone's making bread. You're offered a crust. You chew it slowly, looking up at the sky. A hawk circles above, maybe a real bird, maybe a wink from Horus. Either way, it's the first time in days you've looked at the sky without squinting through stress. Mainstream historical fact. Servants like you weren't always seen as lowly. Some rose in ranks, becoming scribes, stewards, even advisors. A rare few were buried with honors, praised for loyalty, carved into stone beside their masters. But you're not chasing that. You're just trying to breathe. The steward approaches once more. You're off rotation for today. You blink. Really, he nods. And then this is the part you'll remember. He says, "You did good." Pharaoh noticed. You don't believe him. Not really. But you smile anyway. You spend your off day under the fig tree, feet bare, robes dusty. But this time you're still. You don't polish. You don't carry. You don't chase oxen, extinguish lamps, or hold mirrors to the moon. You just sit, and as the sun begins to set, casting gold across the temple stones, you let your eyes close. Not from exhaustion, but from stillness. The kind of stillness earned, not given. And in this moment, just this one being a servant doesn't suck. It feels sacred. And now your day in the sandals of a Pharaoh's servant is done. Your hands are no longer blistered. Your knees no longer aching from kneeling before gods who may or may not be listening. The sounds of chants and sandals on stone fade into silence, and the smell of lotus sweat and dust dissolves into the soft memory of dusk. You've walked through grand halls and narrow servant corridors. You've fanned sacred bulls, held mirrors to the moon, and learned the art of disappearing while still being everywhere. You've survived linen scrubbing, lamp extinguishing, ox wrangling, and ceremonial comb passing. And you did it all on an empty stomach, with a full list of orders. But here at the end of the story, you finally get what most servants in ancient Egypt never did. Rest. The Nile flows quietly in the background, no longer rising or flooding, just existing. The torchlight flickers gently across cool temple stone. The sacred cat purrs somewhere near your feet. You are not rushing anymore. You are simply breathing. So lie back now. Let the weight of empires and errands fall off your shoulders. You've served the gods, the royals, and your fellow man. And now it's time to serve yourself a long, dreamless sleep. Tomorrow history will wake up again. But tonight you don't have to. Sleep well, my friend.